This video continues with 50. Chapter 50. Homelander 3 Bonus Chapter. Reborn in the boys with a Plunder system. My target is Homelander. 50. Chapter 50. Homelander 3 Bonus Chapter. Mitchell groaned in his sleep. He shifted, his hand clutching at his chest. His subconscious mind was registering the distress, the sudden heat blooming in his core. Homelander pushed a little harder. He increased the intensity by a fraction. He just heated it enough to denature the proteins, to send the electrical signals of the pacemaker nodes into chaos. The heart seized. Mitchell's eyes flew open. He gasped, a choking sound. He tried to sit up, but his body wouldn't obey. His hands clawed at his chest, tearing the silk pajamas. His face turned a deep purple. He stared out the window. For a second, his dying eyes focused on the figure hovering in the darkness outside. The figure with the glowing red eyes and the cape. Mitchell tried to scream, but his lungs were paralyzed by cardiac failure. He convulsed once, twice, a violent arching of his back as his heart gave one final flutter. Then he collapsed back onto the pillows. His eyes glazed over, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Homelander lowered his gaze. He scanned the body. No burns, no entry wound, and no sign of external trauma. Just a fat old man who had a massive heart attack in his sleep. "Rest in peace," Senator Homelander whispered. He pushed off from the air, shooting upwards into the clouds before anyone on the street below could look up. The flight to Greenwich took less than 2 minutes. Congressman Holloway's estate was a fortress of old money. High stone walls, wrought iron gates, and a long driveway lined with ancient oaks. Homelander slowed, dropping out of the sky like a falling star. He hovered above the slate roof of the mansion. He activated his X-ray vision. Servants in the East Wing, asleep. A security guard in a booth at the front gate, watching a movie on his phone. And Holloway. The congressman was in his study on the ground floor. He was sitting in a leather armchair, a glass of scotch in his hand, reading a file. The file was stamped with the Department of Defense seal. He descended. He landed softly on the manicured lawn outside the study. He moved with a speed that defied the laws of inertia. He moved so fast the doors didn't even have time to rattle. Holloway saw a blur of blue and red, and then Homelander was standing over him. "Congressman," Homelander said pleasantly. Holloway's mouth opened. He dropped the glass. It hit the thick Persian rug with a dull thud, not breaking, the amber liquid staining the wool. Homelander," Holloway stammered. "What? How?" "I was in the neighborhood," Homelander said. He looked down at the file in Holloway's lap. "Working late? Defending the nation?" Yes," Holloway said, his face draining of color. "Yes, of course, always." "Good," Homelander said. "We appreciate it. We really do." He stepped closer. Holloway shrank back into his chair, the smell of fear radiating off him. "But you know," Homelander said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Stress is a killer. You work too hard, Congressman. It takes a toll on the heart." Holloway's eyes widened. He realized that this was not a social call. "Please," Holloway whispered, I can help you. Anything you want." "I have everything I want," Homelander said. "I'm Homelander." His eyes began to glow. Holloway tried to scramble out of the chair. Homelander placed a hand on Holloway's shoulder. He held him there. The weight of the hand was immovable, like a mountain resting on his collarbone. "SHH," Homelander soothed. "It'll be quick." He focused. The invisible tunnel of heat bridged the gap between his eyes and Holloway's chest. He bypassed the shirt, the skin, the ribs. He found the heart. He turned up the heat. Holloway screamed. It was a high sound that was cut short as his heart convulsed. The blood inside his chest reached a critical temperature. The pressure spiked. A valve blew. Holloway clutched at his chest, his fingernails digging into his shirt. His face turned red, then purple. His eyes bulged. He looked at Homelander, begging, pleading. Homelander just watched. He watched the life fade. He watched the panic turn to nothing. Holloway slumped sideways in the chair. His head lolled. He was gone. Homelander lifted his hand from the corpse's shoulder. He stepped back. "Cleaned," he murmured. He walked to the French doors. He unlocked them, stepped out into the night, and closed them gently behind him. He looked up at the stars. He crouched and launched himself into the sky. the force of his takeoff leaving a small crater in the perfect lawn. The top of Vought Tower was the highest point in the city. Above the gargoyles, above the antenna arrays, there was a flat platform where the eagle statues stood watch over Manhattan. It was Homelander's sanctuary, the only place where he could look down on everything. He landed on the ledge, his boots crunching on the stone. The wind up here was fierce, a howling gale that would have knocked a normal man off his feet. Homelander stood in it like a statue, letting it whip his cape around him. He looked out at the city. The lights stretched out to the horizon, a grid of electricity and life. Millions of people, millions of ants. They slept in their beds because he let them. They lived their lives because he allowed it. They think they can replace me, he whispered to the wind. He thought of Senator Mitchell, clutching his chest. He thought of Holloway, the fear in his eyes. He felt a surge of power coiling in his gut. I can do whatever I want, he said, his voice rising over the wind. He unzipped his pants. He gripped himself, his eyes fixed on the city below. He imagined the people down there, sleeping, ignorant. He imagined burning them all. He imagined saving them all. It didn't matter. They were his. I can do whatever the F***K I want, he shouted, the words torn from his throat. He stroked himself, the friction and the cold air heightening the sensation. He thought about his power. He thought about the fear he had seen in Holloway's eyes. It was better than love. It was purer. He threw his head back, looking up at the full moon. He released, his body shuddering with the force of his climax. He panted, his breath misting in the cold air. He zipped up his pants and smoothed his suit. He walked to the edge of the gargoyle and looked down. I am the only one, he whispered. I am the real God. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 51, chapter 51, piece 1. Beams of pale gold cut through the sheer curtains, turning the floating dust motes into suspended constellations. My superhuman physiology usually demanded instant alertness, a 0 to 60 transition that left no room for grogginess, but today my mind allowed itself a rare luxury, a moment of peace. I lay there for a minute, listening to the heartbeat of the penthouse. And then the smell hit me. It was faint, drifting down the hallway like a beckoning finger. The umami richness of dashi stock and the caramelized scent of soy sauce hitting a hot pan. I smiled at the ceiling. I threw off the sheets and walked to the bathroom. The shower was a scalding cascade that washed away the lingering tension of the last few days. I dressed simply, black joggers and a white t-shirt that fit close to the skin. I walked out of the room, following the scent. When I rounded the corner into the kitchen, the scene was almost identical to the previous morning, yet the energy was entirely different. Yesterday, there had been a hesitant tension. Today, there was a rhythm. Kimiko stood at the stove, wearing the same oversized gray hoodie, but she had rolled the sleeves up past her elbows. She was flipping a rectangular omelet in a square pan tamagaki with a flick of her wrist that was as precise as a sword strike. "Oh, Hugh," I said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "Good morning." She turned, the spatula held loosely in her hand, and gave me a small smile. She raised her hand and signed, her fingers moving fluidly. "Good morning." I walked over to the island. "You are spoiling me," I said in Japanese. 2 days in a row, I might forget how to cook for myself. She rolled her eyes, a wonderfully normal gesture, and pointed to a pile of scallions on the cutting board. Then she pointed to a knife. "Work for it." "Understood, chef," I grinned. I washed my hands and took my station beside her. I chopped the scallions, the sharp thwack, thwack, thwack of the blade creating a beat. She handled the fish, sliding the mackerel under the broiler. We carried the food to the dining table. The spread was impressive. The rolled omelet, grilled mackerel, miso soup with clams, pickles, and steaming white rice. We sat. She served me first, placing the bowl of rice with 2 hands, a gesture of respect that I returned with a bow of my head. Itadakimasu. The food was incredible, better than anything my private chefs could have concocted, simply because it was made by her. After the meal, as we cleared the table, I gestured to the living room. "Class is in session," I said in English. She nodded, a look of determination crossing her face. We sat on the floor by the coffee table, a stack of children's workbooks and flashcards spread out between us. It was absurd, really. A billionaire arms dealer and a super-powered assassin, sitting on a Persian rug worth more than a house, looking at pictures of apples and balls. I said, pointing to the letter, apple. She mimicked the shape of the mouth, though no sound came out. She picked up a pen and wrote the letter A in the notebook. Her handwriting was jagged, fierce strokes that threatened to tear the paper. Gently, I said, reaching out. I placed my hand over hers. Her skin was warm, her hand small but dense with muscle. I guided her movement, smoothing out the jagged lines into a curve, like water. She looked at our hands, then up at me. Her eyes were dark pools, unreadable but intense. We stayed like that for a moment, my hand covering hers, the silence stretching thin. Then she gently pulled her hand free and wrote the letter B perfectly. She looked at me, a smug eyebrow raised. I laughed, okay, show off. We spent 2 hours like that. She was a sponge, her enhanced brain soaking up the syntax and vocabulary at a terrifying rate. Around noon, I turned on the massive wall-mounted TV. I kept the volume low. The news channel was breaking in with a special report. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Tragedy in D.C., 2 politicians dead." I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing. "Breaking news," the anchor said, her face grave. "Senator Mitchell, chairman of the Defense Appropriations Committee, was found dead in his New York penthouse early this morning. Preliminary reports indicate a massive cardiac event." The screen flashed a photo of the senator. In a shocking coincidence, the anchor continued, Congressman Holloway was also found dead at his estate in Greenwich. Authorities are citing natural causes, likely heart failure brought on by stress. Both men were key figures in the upcoming military budget hearings. I sat back, hiding a cold smile behind my hand. Natural causes. Kimiko tapped my knee. I looked over. She was pointing at the screen, a question in her eyes. "Bad men," I said simply. "They hurt people. Now they are gone." She nodded, accepting the summary. She didn't care about politics. She pointed to the remote, then mimed a sword swing. "You want to watch the samurai show?" I asked. She nodded. I switched the input. We watched in silence for a while, the rhythmic clashing of steel on steel filling the room. On screen, the Ronin protagonist was engaged in a duel in a bamboo forest. The choreography was beautiful, a blur of motion and intent. Kimiko sat up straighter. Her eyes tracked the swords. Her muscles twitched, mirroring the strikes. She turned to me. She stood up and mimed holding a sword, swinging it in a fluid arc. Then she pointed at me, then at the door leading to the gym. "Let's fight." I smiled. "You think you can take me today?" Her eyes sparkled. She held up 2 fingers, then made a 0 with her hand. 2-0. She was keeping score of our sparring sessions. "Fine," I said, standing up. "Let's go." I went to the weapon rack and retrieved the 2 white oak bakken. I tossed one to her. She caught it out of the air without looking, the wood slapping into her palm with a sharp crack. She launched herself at me. She covered the 20 feet between us in a heartbeat, the wooden sword sweeping in a horizontal arc aimed at my ribs. I stepped into the strike, blocking it with a vertical parry. The wood clacked loudly. She spun, using the momentum of the block to fuel a backhand strike. I ducked, feeling the wind of the wood passing inches above my head. We were both holding back, of course. If we used our full strength, the wooden swords would shatter into splinters on the first impact, but the speed was superhuman. We traded blows in a rapid-fire staccato rhythm. Clack, 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 clack. She was a whirlwind, attacking from every angle, using her agility to bounce off the walls, to slide under my guard. I was the anchor, moving with minimal motions, turning her aggression against her. She lunged for a thrust. I sidestepped, trapping her sword under mine. I twisted, disarming her. The bakken flew from her hand and skittered across the mat. I brought my sword up, stopping the tip an inch from her throat. "Dead," I whispered. She froze, her chest was heaving, a sheen of sweat on her forehead. Her eyes were wide, locked on mine. Goal, 100 power stones, equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 52, chapter 52, piece 2. Then she smiled. In a blur, she dropped to the floor, sweeping my legs. I fell, my back hitting the mat with a thud. Before I could recover, she was on top of me, straddling my chest, her knees pinning my arms. She had snatched my bakken from my hand as I fell, and now she held it across my throat, pressing down just enough to let me know she had one. She leaned down, her face inches from mine. Her hair hung down, creating a curtain that cut off the rest of the world. I could feel the heat radiating from her body. I could smell the faint scent of her shampoo and the adrenaline of the fight. Her eyes were dark, dilated and intensely alive. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with combat. She looked at my lips, then back up to my eyes. She slowly lifted the sword from my throat. She stayed there, her weight pressing me into the mat. "That's a point for you," I said, my voice sounding a little breathless even to my own ears. She smirked, she tapped my nose with her finger. "Boop." Then she rolled off me and stood up, offering me a hand. I took it, she pulled me up effortlessly. "You're getting faster," I said, brushing myself off. She shrugged, but she looked pleased. I checked my watch, it's getting late, and I'm starving. I looked at her. She was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, sweat dampening her hairline. She looked beautiful. "We're going out," I said. Her head snapped toward me, eyes widening in alarm. She shook her head vigorously, pointing at the window, then making the sign of the Vought logo she had drawn before. "Danger." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I know a place. It's a private restaurant, very exclusive." She looked doubtful. She touched her face, then her hair. "I can't go out like this." "We'll get cleaned up," I said, "and I took the liberty of ordering some things for you. They should be in your closet." She looked at me, suspicious. "Go look," I said. She hesitated, then turned and ran out of the gym. I followed at a slower pace. I went to my own room, showered and changed. I put on a suit, not a business suit, but something sleeker. Black silk shirt, no tie, a velvet dinner jacket. I walked out into the living room and waited. 10 minutes later, the door to the guest suite opened. Kimiko stepped out. She was wearing a dress I had selected from a high-end designer's lookbook. It was an emerald green silk that flowed over her body like water. It had a high neck but an open back, revealing the smooth muscles of her shoulders. She had pulled her hair up into an elegant bun, leaving a few strands to frame her face. She looked uncomfortable, tugging slightly at the hem, but she also looked stunning. She looked at me, seeking approval. "Wow," I said. She blushed, looking down at her feet, which were currently encased in a pair of strappy heels. She was clearly still figuring out how to balance in. "You look incredible," I said, walking over and offering my arm. "Ready." She took a deep breath, then nodded. She looped her arm through mine. Her grip was tight and nervous. We took the private elevator down to the garage. Marcus was waiting by a different car this time, a vintage Rolls-Royce Phantom, a vehicle that screamed old-world privacy. "The orchid room, Marcus," I said. "Yes, sir." The drive was smooth. The partition was up, giving us privacy in the back seat. Kimiko stared out the window, watching the city lights blur by. She was tense, her eyes scanning every car we passed, looking for threats. I placed my hand over hers on the seat. "Relax, you're with me." She looked at me, then slowly relaxed her shoulders. The orchid room was located in the basement of a nondescript brownstone in the West Village. There was no sign, just a heavy wooden door. Marcus opened the car door. We stepped out. I led her to the entrance. I knocked once. A panel slid open, eyes checked us, and the door swung wide. The interior was a world of hushed luxury. Dark wood, red velvet, and the soft glow of candles. There were only 5 tables in the entire restaurant, each separated by soundproof screens. "Mr. Spencer," the maitre d' whispered, "your usual table is ready." He led us to a secluded alcove in the back. We sat. The privacy was absolute. "This place has a strict no phones policy," I explained as a waiter poured water. "And the staff are paid very well to be blind." She looked around, taking in the atmosphere. She relaxed, realizing that no one was looking at her. The dinner was an omakase experience, chef's choice. Course after course of exquisite masterpieces arrived. Sea urchin with truffle. And the wine. I ordered a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir. "It's strong," I warned as I poured her a glass, "but good." She picked up the glass, sniffed it, and took a sip. Her eyes widened. She took another sip. We ate and drank. With every glass, the walls came down a little more. My regeneration meant I metabolized alcohol fast, but I let myself feel the buzz. Kimiko, with her regeneration, was in a similar boat, but the sheer quantity we were consuming was doing the trick. Her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes were bright and glassy. She was smiling more, her silent laughter coming easier. She reached across the table and touched my face, tracing the line of my jaw with a cool finger. It was a bold move, fueled by the wine. She pointed to herself, then to me, then brought her 2 index fingers together. "We are the same." "Yes," I said, covering her hand with mine. "We are." We left the restaurant 2 hours later, both of us stumbling slightly. The cold night air felt good. The ride back was a blur of city lights and soft jazz on the radio. Kimiko leaned her head on my shoulder, her body warm against mine. When we got back to the penthouse, the silence of the apartment felt welcoming. "Water," I mumbled, loosening my collar. "We need water." We stumbled into the living room. I collapsed onto the massive sofa. Kimiko followed, dropping down beside me. She kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief. She pulled her legs up, curling into the corner of the sofa, but then she shifted. She moved closer. She rested her head on my chest. I froze for a second, then relaxed. I put my arm around her shoulders, pulling her in. She fit perfectly. The city lights twinkled outside the window, a galaxy of stars below us. I closed my eyes. The last thing I felt before the darkness took me was the rhythmic beat of her heart against my ribs and the warmth of her hand resting over mine. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 53, Chapter 53, Commander 1. The first thing I registered was the weight. It was a warm pressure against my chest, a grounding force in the shifting landscape of sleep. The second thing was the scent, a faint trace of vanilla shampoo and the muskier smell of sleep. I opened my eyes, but only a fraction. The morning sun was streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the living room in a harsh light. I was still on the sofa. Kimiko was curled against me, her head resting on my pectoral, her arm thrown carelessly across my stomach. Her legs were tangled with mine beneath the throw blanket we must have pulled over ourselves in the hazy hours of the early morning. My superhuman physiology usually woke me with the alertness of a tripwire snapping, but the alcohol and the sheer emotional exhaustion of the previous night had dulled the edge. Her breathing was steady, rhythmic. In, out, but it was too deliberate. She was awake. She had probably woken up minutes, maybe hours ago, realized where she was and stayed. A strange warmth, unrelated to the physical contact, bloomed in my chest. For a weapon forged in trauma, for a woman whose first instinct was to kill anything that touched her, this was monumental. She felt safe enough to feign sleep rather than retreat. I closed my eyes again, regulating my own breathing to match a sleeping rhythm. I decided to give her the dignity of the moment. We lay there in the quiet penthouse, 2 monsters pretending to be normal people, suspended in a fragile bubble of peace. It lasted for another 20 minutes. The sun climbed higher, warming the leather of the sofa. BZZT. Bing. My phone, resting on the coffee table, vibrated violently against the glass and let out a loud chirp. It was a push notification from a news app, 10 things you didn't know about Queen Maeve's diet. The noise shattered the silence like a dropped plate. Kimiko jerked her head, snapping up. I flinched, my eyes flying open. We looked at each other. Her hair was a mess, sticking up in wild angles. My shirt was rumpled. We were tangled together like pretzels. For a second, the old tension threatened to return. Then I looked at the phone, then back at her and rolled my eyes. "Stupid phone," I mumbled in Japanese, my voice thick with sleep. A snort escaped her, then a giggle, and then we were both laughing, a shared release of the awkwardness. She untangled herself from the blanket and scrambled off the sofa. She stood there for a second, smoothing down her green dress, her cheeks flushed a deep pink. She looked at me, bit her lip, and then turned and ran. She bolted down the hallway towards her guest's suite, the door clicking shut behind her a second later. I lay there for a moment longer, staring at the empty space where she had been. System, I thought, don't say a word. I didn't say anything, the system replied, its voice radiating mock innocence. I'm just enjoying the rom-com. It's very wholesome. Season 2 is going to be great. I shook my head, a smile still tugging at my lips. I stood up, stretched, my joints popping with the sound of cracking pistol shots, and headed to my own master suite. The shower was cold today. I dressed in fresh clothes, dark slacks, a cashmere sweater. I dried my hair and walked into my bedroom. I walked to the walk-in closet, pushed aside a row of bespoke suits, and placed my palm against the back panel. The biometric scanner read my print, my pulse, and my heat signature. The panel slid aside silently, revealing the entrance to the inner sanctum. The wall of monitors hummed to life as I entered. I sat in the chair and pulled up the notification log. While I had been drinking Pinot Noir, the red unit had been working. Operation report, Jersey Logistics Hub. Status complete. Targets neutralized, 0 stealth protocol active. Assets acquired, VOT shipping manifests, Compound V distribution logs. Anomaly detected. I frowned, anomaly. I tapped the file. A video feed from Red One's helmet cam opened on the center screen. The footage showed the interior of a massive warehouse. It was dark, the only light coming from the Red Unit's night vision filters. They were moving through the aisles of crates, scanning barcodes. Red One stopped. He pointed to a shelf in Section D, Row 4. There, sitting conspicuously on top of a crate of VOT-branded medical supplies, was a small object. It was too clean, too deliberately placed. Red One reached out and picked it up. It was a ruggedized grade hard drive. He turned it over. There were no markings, no serial numbers. But on the bottom, etched into the metal casing, was a tiny symbol. A simplified eagle holding a shield. It was the handshake symbol for a CIA dead drop. The video ended. I reached into the empty air. My hand disappeared into the system inventory and returned holding the black hard drive. I examined it. It was an encrypted solid-state drive, likely air-gapped with a self-destruct failsafe if the wrong password was entered. I plugged it into my terminal. Not directly into my network, that would be suicide, but into a sandbox, a completely isolated virtual machine designed to detonate digital bombs safely. The drive spun up. A prompt appeared on the screen. Enter passphrase. It was a standard agency AES 256-bit key, layered with a trapdoor algorithm. Sophisticated for 2019, but to me, it was like reading a book in a slightly difficult font. I bypassed the front door entirely, slipping through the kernel-level code. I disabled the self-destruct wipe. I unlocked the data partition. The drive opened. There was only one file, a text document named contact.txt. I opened the text file. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 54, Chapter 54, Commander 2. It contained a single line of text, secure frequency, 144.92, encrypted channel alpha, waiting for signal. It was a trap, of course, or at least a trace. As soon as I connected to that frequency, they would try to triangulate my position. Let's see who's listening, I said. I began to type. I set up a signal bounce. I routed my connection through servers in Beijing, Moscow, Caracas, and finally, a VOT subsidiary in London. If they tried to trace me, they'd end up knocking on Stan Edgar's front door. I activated the connection. The screen shifted to a secure chat interface. It was blank. I launched a counter-trace. While the connection was being established, I sent a packet of hunter-killer code down the line. It rode the frequency back to the source. It bypassed their VPNs, chewed through their firewalls, and located the terminal at the other end. I hijacked their local webcam. A new window popped up on my monitor. The image was grainy but clear enough. It was a small room. 3 people were sitting around a table, staring at a laptop. I recognized them instantly. Grace Mallory, looking older, tired, but with eyes like flint. Susan Rayner, the deputy director, looking nervous. General Higgins, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I turned up the gain on their microphone. Signal is live, Rayner was saying. It's bouncing all over the globe. We can't pin it down. I told you, Grace, these are retired military boys, Higgins said, leaning forward and tapping the table for emphasis. I recognize the tactical spread and the suppression patterns. It's ingrained. These are old warhorses who went off the reservation because they're sick of Vought's circus. Patriots or not, they have the data we need, Mallory replied, her voice like sandpaper. I sent an encrypted ping to Red 1. Order, infiltrate situation room B Langley. Extract context from Higgins. Red 1 responded instantly. Stationed at a Spencer Black site on the edge of the city, he shrank his mass until he was a mere speck, barely the size of a gnat. He began a series of 10-kilometer jumps. NYC to Virginia was a long stretch, but with teleportation, Tier 2, he crossed the distance in a strobe light flicker, bypassing every radar and sensor between Manhattan and the Potomac. He slipped through the reinforced ventilation grates of the CIA headquarters and into the Situation Room. From a perch atop a high-intensity lamp, Red 1 activated telepathy, Tier 3. He reached into General Higgins' mind, bypassing the man's natural mental discipline and flaying the specific memories of the 4:15 a.m. meeting at the White House. He saw it all, the grainy photos of my handiwork, Mallory's American doctrine theory, and the general's own misplaced pride in his retired boys. Red 1 withdrew, jumping back to the city before the general even felt the phantom itch of a mental intrusion. A moment later, my terminal pinged. A comprehensive text dump of the extracted memories appeared on my screen, detailing every word spoken in the Oval Office proxy meeting. I scanned the file, a grin spreading across my face as I realized exactly how they had characterized me. Fine, I murmured in the silence of my office, my fingers finally hitting the keys. If they want to believe I'm an old warhorse leading a phantom platoon, I'll play the role. I turned to the chat interface. I typed. Signal received. They're here, she whispered. Mallory took the keyboard. She typed slowly. Identify. I typed back instantly. Irrelevant, state your purpose. Mallory typed again. We have a common enemy, VOGHT. Enemies are common, objectives differ. He's feeling us out, Mallory said. We do not seek to impede your operations. We seek to cooperate. I paused. We do not take orders. Mallory read the line and nodded. We need evidence of VOUGHT's illegal operations. The military bill passes in 48 hours. We need proof to stop it. I considered this. Giving it to them would cripple Vought's legislative push. What is the price? I smiled. Intelligence. Clarify. We require the locations of unsanctioned gatherings, criminal SUPES, and off-book holding facilities. Give it to him, Higgins said. If he takes out the trash, Vought weakens. And if we get that data, we win. Mallory typed. We can provide a list. High-value targets. Confirmed criminal activity protected by VOUGHT NDA. Send IT. A file transfer window appeared. Vought watchlist classified, PDF. I accepted the file. It downloaded instantly. I opened it on a side screen. Dozens of names, locations, safe houses, underground fight clubs, and drug dens run by SUPs. It was a treasure map of XB. Boss, look at this, the system cheered. It's a menu. We've got Messmer's old poker buddies, we've got a fight ring in the Bronx, we've got a soup brothel in Jersey. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet. Focus, I replied. I uploaded a single file in return. Enough to prove Vought was manufacturing super terrorists. Data uploaded. Mallory watched the download bar fill up. We got it, she breathed. One final thing. I typed. Do not attempt to track this signal again. If you do, the partnership ends. Understood, Commander. Commander. I laughed out loud. I severed the connection. I wiped the sandbox, erasing the logs of the chat. I swiveled my chair around to look at the list of targets Mallory had sent. Well, I said, stretching my arms over my head. It looks like the Red Unit has a busy schedule ahead of them. And we get to be the heroes of the Republic while we do it, the system added. God bless America. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 55, Chapter 55, Blood and Ice 1, bonus chapter. The obsidian surface of my desk reflected the cool blue light of a dozen floating monitors. I took a slow sip of black coffee. The bitter liquid washed over my tongue, my Tier 2 enhanced senses dissecting the flavor profile into its base chemical components. I set the mug down without making a sound and leaned back in my high-backed leather chair. My eyes locked on the decrypted files salvaged from the ashes of Project Odessa. General Radek was a convenient scapegoat, and Stan Edgar was currently chasing his own shadow, tearing Vought's internal structure apart looking for a traitor who did not exist. The board was exactly as I had arranged it. But true power wasn't just about misdirection, it was about the continuous acquisition of assets. And the files staring back at me from the primary monitor were the most valuable assets Vought had ever inadvertently created. The Morrow sisters, Marie and Annabeth. I scrolled through the heavily redacted medical logs, the clinical observations recorded by Dr. Cardosa and his team before I had erased them from the earth. Project Odessa was the birthplace of Homelander, but he was not their only success story. He was merely their most public one. The files detailed a highly classified initiative, fetal V injections, administering compound V to a subject before birth, allowing the chemical to rewrite the genetic code at the embryonic level. It had an astronomically high failure rate. Most subjects dissolved in the womb or miscarried as horrific mutations. Marie Morrow was the sole survivor of that specific cohort. I brought up her power profile using the system interface. Target profile, Marie Morrow. Power, Biokinesis Tier 1, Resurrection Tier 1, Hemokinesis Tier 2, Super Defense Tier 1. Super Strength Tier 2, Regeneration Tier 2, Enhanced Senses Tier 3. The data was staggering, a testament to the terrifying potential of Compound V when perfectly integrated into a human genome. She was a god masquerading as a teenager, a walking miracle of biological supremacy. I tapped the screen, bringing up the secondary file. The system interface displays the power profile. Target profile, Annabeth Morrow Power, Precognition Tier 2. I steepled my fingers, resting my chin on my hands. The power sets were formidable, perhaps some of the most potent utility and defensive abilities on the planet. But the files revealed a critical flaw in their design. Their powers were deeply tethered to their endocrine systems. If they were calm, unaware, or suppressed, their access to their maximum power output was bottlenecked. They required an emotional induction, fear, rage, and profound grief to unlock the absolute peak of their Tier 1 capabilities. If Marie Morrow knew I was coming, if she had a fraction of a second to feel the terror of her impending death, her Tier 1 super defense and her biokinetic manipulation of her own blood would make her a nearly impossible target to put down cleanly. If she panicked, she could theoretically trigger a biokinetic surge that would turn the suburban block into a crater. She had to die without knowing she was in danger. She had to be erased from existence in the space between her heartbeats. I dragged a separate window to the center of my screen. My fingers blurred across the mechanical keyboard. I bypassed the standard ISP nodes, diving into the dark web architecture Vought used to track their monitored assets. Marie was a high-value subject, which meant she had a dedicated tracker. I found the encrypted ping disguised as a background update in her phone's operating system. I sliced through the AES 256 encryption. I traced the ping. It bounced off a cell tower in an affluent suburb in upstate New York. Asset location, 42 Elm Street, Rosslyn, New York. Red River Institute had recently released her. She was staying at a transition home, preparing for her heavily publicized enrollment at Godolkin University. I pulled up the satellite imagery of the address. A 2-story suburban house, a manicured lawn, a quiet street, and a mundane setting for an execution. I stood up from the desk, the glow of the monitors reflected in my eyes. I wore my dark-fitting clothes, the fabric silent against my skin. I focused on my physical mass. Size alteration, Tier 3. The walls of my office shot upward into the stratosphere. The fibers of the Persian rug beneath my boots swelled into tangled trunks of wool. The air pressure shifted as my mass condensed into a form no larger than a grain of rice, exactly 0.1 inches tall. I closed my eyes, tuning out the sensory overload. I pictured the satellite map of the upstate New York suburb. Teleportation, Tier 2. Snap! The air-conditioned world of my penthouse vanished, replaced by the damp air of the night. I was on a shingled roof, the city a distant glow on the horizon. The 10-kilometer jump had been effortless. I repeated the process, a series of silent jumps, each one bringing me closer. Snap, snap, snap. Finally, I materialized on the roof of a house directly across the street from my target. I crawled to the edge, a tiny observer. The group home was quiet, its windows dark save for a single light on the second floor. Marie's room. Enhanced senses, Tier 2. I focused my vision, piercing the darkness. I could see the faint glow of a Vought-installed security camera mounted under the eaves of the front porch. I made my size a little bigger. I pulled out my phone from the system inventory. I linked it to the local Wi-Fi, an unprotected residential network, and used it as a bridge to access the Vought camera's IP address. I caught the feed, looped a static 3-minute recording of the empty street, and fed it back into the camera's output. I put back my phone in the system inventory. I made my size 0.1 inches again. I prepared to make the jump across the street into her bedroom. But then, my enhanced senses caught something. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 56, chapter 56, Blood and Ice 2. It was a sound, subtle and out of place in the sleeping neighborhood. The slow crunch of tires on gravel. The muffled purr of a hybrid engine running idle. I turned my gaze down the street. 50 yards away, parked under the heavy canopy of an ancient oak tree, was a dark sedan. Its headlights were off, but the engine was running. Enhanced senses, Tier 2. I focused on my hearing. Through the glass and metal of the car, I heard a heartbeat. It was fast and erratic, spiking with adrenaline and sheer terror. I zoomed my vision, piercing the gloom and the tinted windshield. Sitting in the driver's seat, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white, was a young woman. Her face was pale, bathed in the faint glow of the dashboard instruments. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, her chest heaving with silent sobs. It was Annabeth Morrow. I froze, calculating the implications. In the canon timeline of events, Annabeth and Marie were entirely estranged. Annabeth refused to speak to her sister, terrified of the girl who had accidentally killed their parents. And she had no logical reason to be parked outside Marie's transition house in the middle of the night. Unless... Precognition, Tier 2. The realization clicked into place like a chambered round. Her power was emotion-based. What greater emotional trigger could there be than the impending murder of her only living relative? My sheer intent to kill Marie had sent a shockwave into the future, and Annabeth's precognition had caught the echo. She had seen her sister die. She had driven here in a state of absolute panic, not knowing what to do, trapped between her fear of her sister and her terror of the vision. She was a loose thread that could unravel the flawless tapestry I was weaving. I shifted my mental anchor from Marie's bedroom window to the passenger seat of the idling sedan. Snap! The crisp night air was instantly replaced by the warm scent of the car's interior, a mix of cheap vanilla air freshener and cold sweat. I was standing on the leather upholstery of the passenger seat, a 0.1-inch speck of absolute lethality. Annabeth was still crying, staring fixedly at the house down the street. She didn't notice the microscopic displacement of air. She didn't hear my arrival over the sound of her own frantic heartbeat. "I'm sorry," she was whispering to herself, her voice cracking. "I don't know what to do. I'm sorry, Marie. He's coming, he's coming, he's coming." She knew. I felt no pity. Pity was an emotion for men who played by the rules of morality. I was operating on the physics of survival. I engaged my powers simultaneously. I needed to eliminate her instantly, silently, and without leaving a trace of physical trauma or a messy crime scene that would draw unnecessary attention. I focused my will on the air surrounding Annabeth's body. Cryokinesis Tier 1. The temperature inside the driver's seat plummeted from 70 degrees to absolute zero in a fraction of a microsecond. Her neurons froze before the pain signals could travel from her skin to her brain. The water in her cells, her blood, the moisture in her eyes, it all crystallized instantaneously. An eerie crackle filled the cabin, like the sound of a fragile glass ornament cooling too quickly. She became an immaculate statue of frosted flesh. Her tears froze as solid tracks of ice on her cheeks. The condensation from her aborted breath fell to her lap as a shower of diamond-hard snow. The leather of the steering wheel beneath her hands grew brittle and pale, but the car itself remained undamaged. The absolute zero field was hyper-localized, wrapped around her body like a second skin. It was a perfectly silent and a perfectly clean execution. A holographic interface materialized in the empty space above the dashboard, visible only to my eyes. Soup neutralized, Annabeth Morrow. Power detected, precognition Tier 2. Choose option, retain or convert. I stared at the glowing text, analyzing the strategic value of the asset. Precognition was an incredible tool. Knowing the future, sensing ambushes, predicting stock markets, the applications were limitless. But power required focus, and it required integration. A Tier 2 power would be a persistent hum in the back of my mind. Furthermore, relying on precognition often bred complacency. If you always knew what was coming, your reflexes dulled. I relied on my intellect, my memory of the canon, and my overwhelming physical superiority. More importantly, I was about to plunder a veritable treasure trove of Tier 1 abilities from her sister. Convert. Converting power, precognition Tier 2. Conversion complete. You have gained 3,000 XP. I turned my attention back to the target house. It was time for the main event. I recalibrated my spatial coordinates. I locked onto the faint glow of the second-story window. Snap! I materialized on the carpeted floor of Marie Morrow's bedroom. I was still 0.1 inches tall. The fibers of the carpet rose around me like a beige jungle. Before my eyes had even fully adjusted to the new lighting, I engaged my ultimate trump card. Super Speed Tier 1. The world stopped. The shift to Mach 30 processing speeds was a violent transition. The low hum of the house's air conditioning stretched into an unrecognizable bass note. A speck of dust, illuminated by the bedside lamp, hung suspended in the air, motionless. I returned to my normal size. Because I was moving at a speed that defied physics, the displacement of air that accompanied my growth did not create a shockwave or a sound. The air molecules were pushed aside in slow motion, rolling away from me in thick ripples. I stood at my full height in the center of the bedroom. Marie Morrow was standing by her bed. She was a portrait of mundane stillness. She was holding a neatly folded crimson t-shirt, her arms mid-motion as she prepared to place it into an open canvas duffel bag sitting on her mattress. The bag was half full of jeans, socks, and books. She was packing for Godolkin University. Her face was relaxed, an absent-minded smile playing on her lips. But if she blinked, if she registered in my presence, her heart rate would spike. Fear would flood her endocrine system. The adrenaline would act as the key, unlocking her Tier 1 potential. Her blood would become harder than steel and sharper than monomolecular wire. Her biokinesis would kick in, rendering her practically immortal, capable of healing any physical trauma I inflicted as fast as I dealt it. And with Tier 1 resurrection lying dormant in her cells, even killing her might only be a temporary inconvenience. She was the apex predator of this generation. But an apex predator cannot fight what it cannot perceive. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 57, Chapter 57, Blood and Ice 3. I walked toward her. Moving through the thickened air took deliberate effort, my Tier 1 strength pushing against the atmospheric drag. I stopped right in front of her. She was staring straight ahead, looking right through the space where I now stood. Her chest was paused mid-inhalation. I extended my index and middle fingers. I placed them gently against the side of her neck, pressing directly over her carotid artery. Cryokinesis Tier 1. I poured absolute zero energy directly into her circulatory system. I bypassed the skin and the muscle, focusing the thermal deletion entirely on the liquid flowing through her veins. The effect, even at Mach 30 perception, was instantaneous. Her blood, the very source of her godhood, crystallized. The water molecules locked into jagged structures. The ice expanded violently within her veins, arteries, and capillaries. The sheer speed of the freeze shattered her internal biology. Her veins ruptured under the expanding ice. Her heart froze mid-beat, cracking into sharp red shards within her chest cavity. The moisture in her brain crystallized, turning the soft tissue into a block of frozen matter. Her skin immediately lost all color, turning a translucent white, laced with a spiderweb network of dark blue where her veins had burst. The frost bloomed across her skin, creeping over her clothes, frosting the crimson t-shirt she held in her hands. Her consciousness was eradicated before her brain could even register the temperature drop. The emotional trigger required to unlock her power was bypassed entirely. But I could not leave it at that. The system profile had specifically listed Resurrection, Tier 1, the ability to return from the dead within an hour. I did not know the specific biological parameters required for that power to initiate. Did it require an intact brain, a beating heart? I could not take the chance. To prevent a resurrection, there must be nothing left to resurrect. I withdrew my hand from her frozen neck. I took a half step back, shifting my stance. I brought my right arm back, pulling potential energy into the dense musculature of my shoulder and back. Super Strength Tier 1. I executed a precise punch, driving my knuckles directly into the center of her frozen sternum. The kinetic force of the blow was cataclysmic. Because her body was frozen at absolute zero, it possessed no elasticity. It was infinitely brittle. The impact of my fist sent a localized kinetic shockwave, rippling through every crystallized cell in her body. Cracked. She shattered. It was a silent explosion of anatomical glass. Her torso, her head, her arms, her legs, the entire statue of frozen flesh and crystallized blood instantly disintegrated into millions of glittering shards. She became a cloud of crimson and white dust, suspended perfectly in the frozen air of the bedroom. The crimson t-shirt she had been holding simply dropped, falling at a fraction of a millimeter per second as gravity tried to pull it down through the molasses, thick air. I lowered my fist. I released my hold on the super speed. Time crashed back into the room. The sound of the air conditioning returned. The low hum of the suburban night resumed. And the cloud of shattered ice clattered to the carpeted floor. It sounded like someone had dropped a massive chandelier. The glittering shards of frozen blood and tissue bounced and rolled across the beige fibers, a sparkling pile of debris that was already beginning to melt in the room's ambient heat. The crimson shirt landed softly on top of the pile. Silence descended on the room once more. I stood over the remains, my breathing even. The holographic interface materialized in the air before me, casting a cool glow over the macabre scene. Soup neutralized, Marie Morrow. Power, Biokinesis Tier 1, Hemokinesis Tier 2, Super Defense Tier 1, Super Strength Tier 2, Super Regeneration Tier 2, Enhanced Senses Tier 3, Resurrection Tier 1. Choose option, retain or convert. The sheer volume of power displayed on the screen was intoxicating. I possessed the ultimate defensive and offensive capabilities already. I focused on the two true prizes, the abilities that transcended mere physical violence and touched the realm of the divine. Retain, Biokinesis Tier 1 and Resurrection Tier 1. Powers Biokinesis Tier 1 and Resurrection Tier 1 successfully integrated. The biokinesis felt like a sudden awareness of every cell in my body and the potential to command the cells of others. It was the power to knit flesh, to jump-start dead hearts, to strip the debilitating side effects from compound V mutations, and to supercharge the abilities of my allies. The resurrection was a different sensation entirely. It felt like a safety net snapping into place deep within my soul. A metaphysical tether that assured me that even if the impossible happened, even if I was somehow struck down, Death was no longer a permanent condition. I had a 1-hour window to defy the Reaper. I turned my attention to the remaining list. Convert the rest. The system processed the command with rapid efficiency. Converting Hemokinesis, Tier 2, plus 3000 XP. Converting Super Defense, Tier 1, redundant, plus 5000 XP. Converting Enhanced Senses, Tier 3, plus 1500 XP. Converting Super Strength, Tier 2, redundant, plus 3000 XP. Converting Regeneration, Tier 2, redundant, plus 3000 XP. Conversion complete. Total XP gained, 15,500 XP. My mind did the quick arithmetic. The 15,500 XP from Marie, combined with the 3,000 XP from Annabeth, brought the Knight's Haul to an astonishing 18,500 XP. Added to my existing balance of 600 XP, I now possessed 19,100 XP. I looked down at the melting pile of bloody ice on the floor. It was a gruesome sight, but to the authorities, it would be an unsolvable mystery. A girl vanishes from a locked room, leaving behind nothing but a puddle of heavily diluted blood and a dropped t-shirt. I didn't linger to admire my work. I locked onto the spatial coordinates of my penthouse office. Teleportation, Tier 2. Snap. 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 The bedroom vanished. I materialized in the center of my office. I exhaled slowly, rolling my shoulders to release the lingering tension of the Mach 30 compression. I walked over to the obsidian desk and sank into the leather chair. "You okay, boss?" the system asked quietly. That was intense, efficient but intense. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady. I looked at my hands. They looked the same, but they held the power to rewrite life and reverse death. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 58, chapter 58, upgrade 1, bonus chapter. I rested my forearms on the smooth glass of the desk, lacing my fingers together. System, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the absolute authority of a man who had just conquered death itself. Initialize the interface. "Oh, it is a beautiful day in the neighborhood, boss." The system's voice chimed in my head, practically vibrating with digital euphoria. I have to say, the whole shatter her into a million pieces maneuver, 10 out of 10 for theatricality. But the loot is what we're really here for. Pulling up the bank statement now. Try not to pass out from the sheer zeros. The air in front of me shimmered, the holographic interface projecting a glowing overlay directly into my field of vision. System interface. Host, Arian Spencer. Previous balance, 600 XP. Annabeth MOREAU conversion, plus 3000 XP. Marie MOREAU conversions, plus 15500 XP. Total experience points, XP, 19,100. Current powers. Cryokinesis, Tier 1. Biokinesis, Tier 1. Resurrection, Tier 1. Super Strength, Tier 1. Super Defense, Tier 1. Super Speed, Tier 1. Teleportation, Tier 2. Super Stamina, Tier 2. Enhanced Senses, Tier 2. Fire Manipulation, Tier 3. Telekinesis, Tier 3. Shapeshifting, Tier 3. Size Alteration, Tier 3. Telepathy, Tier 3. Cloning, Tier 4. I stared at the number, 19,100. 19,000, I murmured aloud, tasting the words. "You've effectively cornered the market on godhood," the system said, a smug satisfaction in its tone. "With this much XP, you are rewriting the laws of physics that apply to you. We can max out almost everything that matters. The board is yours, boss. How do you want to play it?" I leaned back, closing my eyes. My physical attributes were already maxed out. My Tier 1 strength, defense, speed, and regeneration made me effectively invincible in a physical confrontation. Adding Tier 1 biokinesis meant I could control the very flesh and blood of anyone who dared to stand against me, and Tier 1 resurrection meant that even if they managed the impossible, it wouldn't stick. "We focus on operational supremacy," I said, opening my eyes. the blue light of the interface reflected in my irises. Physical combat is the last resort of an inferior tactician. We are going to upgrade the tools of the ghost. I love it when you talk about strategy. It gets my algorithms all hot and bothered. Where do we start? Teleportation, I commanded. The current limit on my teleportation is 10 kilometers. It is sufficient for crossing a city, for jumping from my car to a boardroom. But it requires sequential jumps to cover real distance. Select teleportation and upgrade to Tier 1. The interface shifted, highlighting the designated power. Power selected, teleportation Tier 2. Current range, 10 kilometers. Upgrade to Tier 1 requires 5,000 XP. Current XP, 19,100. Do you wish to proceed? Execute, I ordered. Deducting 5,000 XP. Upgrade in progress. The sensation of upgrading a physical trait like strength involved the feeling of muscles tearing and rebuilding. Upgrading speed felt like the nervous system catching fire. Upgrading teleportation to Tier 1 was entirely psychological. It was an awe-inspiring expansion of spatial geometry within the mind. I gasped, my hands gripping the armrests of my chair as the concept of distance, in my brain, was violently shattered and rebuilt. It felt as though an invisible tether extending from my consciousness was suddenly shot out of a cannon, racing across the surface of the globe. My mental map of the world, previously confined to the detailed geography of the tri-state area, exploded outward. I could suddenly feel the curvature of the Earth. I could sense the atmospheric pressure dropping over the Rocky Mountains. I could feel the crushing depths of the Atlantic Ocean. Upgrade complete. Power evolved. Teleportation Tier 2, right arrow teleportation Tier 1. New parameters. Range expanded to 1,000 kilometers per instantaneous jump. Activation latency reduced to 0 milliseconds. Sequential jumping strain completely eliminated. 1,000 kilometers, I breathed, opening my eyes. I could be in Washington, D.C. in my next heartbeat, I said. I could stand behind the president in the Oval Office, leave a note on his desk, and be back in this chair before the Secret Service even noticed the air displacement. You could grab deep dish pizza in Illinois and be back before the cheese cools, the system pointed out helpfully. Priorities, man. The tactical applications are absolute, I said, ignoring the joke. Vought's black sites, their remote laboratories, their private islands, they are all instantly accessible. I looked at the interface. Remaining XP, 14,100. Next, I said, my voice hardening. My current telepathy requires me to be within 100 meters of a target. It is excellent for boardroom manipulation and close quarters interrogation. But if I want to know what Edgar is planning before he even speaks the words aloud, I need omniscience. Select telepathy and upgrade to Tier 1. Telepathy to Tier 1, the system confirmed, its tone dropping its usual levity, recognizing the magnitude of the request. Boss, I need to warn you. You are about to skip from Tier 3 directly to Tier 1. The sheer volume of neural data you are going to ingest will be catastrophic if you don't brace for it. You are going to go from hearing a room full of people to hearing a continent. It is going to hurt. My brain processes information at Mach 30. System, I replied coldly. My physical structure is indestructible. All right, just remember to build the walls. You have to filter it, or the noise will drive you insane. Cue the upgrades sequentially, I commanded. Take it to Tier 1. Power selected, telepathy Tier 3. Upgrade to Tier 2 requires 3,000 XP. Upgrade to Tier 1 requires 5,000 XP. Total XP required, 8,000 XP. Current XP, 14,100. Do you wish to proceed? Execute. Deducting 8,000 XP. Upgrade in progress. It began as a high-pitched whine, a localized pressure right behind my eyes, as the power shifted from Tier 3 to Tier 2. The 100-meter radius of my psychic awareness snapped outward to 1 kilometer. Suddenly, the silent penthouse was flooded with the psychic noise of millions of sleeping New Yorkers. Dreams of falling, anxieties about debt, the sharp spikes of insomniac panic, it all washed over me like a tidal wave of static. I gritted my teeth, my Tier 1 super defense keeping my blood vessels from rupturing under the sudden spike in blood pressure. And then, the power broke through the ceiling into Tier 1. The 1-kilometer radius detonated outward to 100 kilometers. My consciousness expanded to encompass the entirety of New York City, Long Island, vast stretches of New Jersey, and deep into upstate New York and Connecticut. I threw my head back, a guttural scream tearing from my throat. My hands slammed down onto the obsidian desk, the Tier 1 strength spider webbing the reinforced glass surface. It was a torrential hurricane of raw human consciousness. I could hear the desperate thoughts of a dying man in a hospital bed in Queens. I could hear the cold mathematics of a sociopath planning a robbery in Newark. I could hear the pure joy of a child waking up in Brooklyn. I could hear lust, terror, boredom, rage, and profound sadness, all overlapping, layering, amplifying until it became a physical weight crushing my skull. Boss, the walls build the walls. The system's voice was barely a whisper in the howling maelstrom of thoughts, a tiny lifeline of digital clarity. Use the super speed. Process it. Filter it out. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. CH30. I gasped for air, forcing my eyes open. The blue light of the monitors was blinding. I engaged the Mach 30 cognitive processing of my super speed. Time dilated. The howling hurricane of voices slowed, separating from a deafening roar into 20 million individual streams of data. I closed my eyes and visualized a fortress. I built walls of titanium in my mind. I took the roaring ocean of thoughts and rooted it outside the fortress. I created a mental dial, a master volume switch for the entire eastern seaboard. With a monumental effort of will, I grabbed the dial and turned it down. The screaming faded to a roar. The roar faded to a murmur. The murmur faded to a whisper. And then, absolute silence. I slumped forward in my chair, resting my forehead against the cracked glass of the desk. My chest heaved as I pulled in ragged breaths of air. The silence of the office was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. Status, I wheezed. Upgrade complete. Power evolved. Telepathy Tier 3, right arrow telepathy Tier 1. New parameters. Range expanded to a 100-kilometer radius. Capabilities. Absolute mind reading of any target within range. Complete mind control and physical puppeteering of thousands of simultaneous targets. Mental presence detection allows for the exact geographic pinpointing of any specific mind within the radius. Memory erasure, alteration, and fabrication can be performed instantaneously. Two-way telepathic communication established at will. You are now a god of the mind, boss. Professor X would weep with envy. Try not to accidentally command the entire city to jump off a bridge. I slowly sat up, rolling my neck. The headache was already fading, the neural pathways permanently expanded to accommodate the god-like capacity. I decided to test the filter. I kept the wall up, but I created a tiny pinhole in the defense. I cast the net outward, scanning the 100-kilometer radius in a fraction of a second. Found Stan Edgar. He was in Manhattan, Upper East Side, a heavily fortified townhouse. I slipped through the pinhole, traversing the miles instantly, and brushed against the edge of his consciousness. He was asleep, but his dreams were highly ordered categorizations of corporate strategy and contingency plans. Even in his subconscious, Stan Edgar was playing chess. He was currently dreaming of a congressional hearing, manipulating senators like pawns. I withdrew smoothly, closing the pinhole. The operation was a flawless success. I looked back at the glowing blue interface floating in the dark room. Remaining XP, 6,100. System, I said, my voice steadying as the residual migraine faded. Select cloning and upgrade to Tier 2. Power selected, cloning Tier 4. Upgrade to Tier 3 requires 1,500 XP. Upgrade to Tier 2 requires 3,000 XP. Total XP required, 4,500 XP. Current XP, 6,100. Do you wish to proceed? Execute. Deducting 4,500 XP. Upgrade in progress. The physical sensation, this time felt as though my very soul was being pulled tight and fractured, dividing into dozens of perfectly identical pieces. The hive mind connection I had experienced with the 5 red unit clones expanded exponentially. My sense of self widened, making room for a small army of consciousnesses that lay dormant within my cells, waiting to be unleashed. Upgrade complete. Power evolved, cloning tier 4, right arrow cloning tier 2. New parameters. Maximum simultaneous clone manifestation increased from 5 to 40. Capabilities. Each of the 40 clones retains the original's baseline physical and elemental capabilities at an optimized fraction. Hive mind bandwidth expanded to handle simultaneous tactical coordination across multiple theaters of operation. 40 clones. I could have 10 of them managing the global branches of Spencer Industries under various shapeshifted personas. I could have a designated surveillance team stationed outside Vought Tower around the clock. I could deploy the Red Unit as an overwhelming tactical strike force capable of wiping out small armies. I checked the balance. Remaining XP, 1,600. I scanned my remaining powers, evaluating their utility against my current strategic goals. My eyes lingered on one in particular. Fire Manipulation, Tier 3. I had plundered it from Lamplighter, thinking elemental versatility would be useful. But the truth was, I barely used it. Cryokinesis was clean. It left no ballistic evidence, and it was devastatingly effective for silent assassinations and flash freezing entire environments. Fire, on the other hand, was messy. It left scorch marks, triggered smoke alarms, and drew immediate attention. Furthermore, my Tier 1 physicals and Tier 1 cryokinesis made a Tier 3 fire ability completely redundant in combat. System, Flag Fire Manipulation for recycling. Power selected, Fire Manipulation Tier 3. Are you sure you want to convert this ability? It's a classic. Who doesn't love a good fireball? Convert it, I said flatly. Converting power, Fire Manipulation Tier 3. Conversion complete. You have gained 1,500 XP. Current XP, 3,100. I felt the internal understanding of combustion and heat slip away from my mind, a warm ember extinguishing itself in the cold void of my capabilities. Final upgrade for the night, I commanded. Select Telekinesis and upgrade to Tier 2. Power selected, Telekinesis Tier 3. Upgrade to Tier 2 requires 3,000 XP. Current XP, 3,100. Do you wish to proceed? Execute. Deducting 3,000 XP. Upgrade in progress. The invisible muscle in my mind flexed and tore, growing denser and vastly more powerful. Before, I could lift a 10-ton weight stack with a modicum of strain. Now, the gravitational hold on the objects in the room felt entirely subject to my whim. Upgrade complete. Power evolved. Telekinesis Tier 3, right arrow telekinesis Tier 2. New parameters. Lifting and manipulation capacity increased to 50 tons. Fine motor control significantly enhanced. I exhaled a long breath. The sheer volume of biological and neurological restructuring I had undergone in the past hour was staggering. System, pull up the final status. The interface refreshed, the blue text glowing with an undeniable finality. Final status. Host, Arian Spencer. Current XP, 100. Powers. Cryokinesis Tier 1. Biokinesis Tier 1. Resurrection Tier 1. Super Strength Tier 1. Super Defense Tier 1. Super Speed Tier 1. Teleportation Tier 1. Telepathy Tier 1. Regeneration Tier 1. Super Stamina Tier 2. Enhanced Senses Tier 2. Telekinesis Tier 2. Cloning Tier 2. Shapeshifting Tier 3. Size Alteration Tier 3. I read the list twice, letting the reality of it settle into my bones. I swiped my hand through the air, closing the holographic interface. The adrenaline was finally beginning to ebb, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. The mental strain of the Tier 1 telepathy upgrade alone would have lobotomized a normal human. My superhuman physiology could handle it, but even a perfect machine needed to power down and run its maintenance cycles. I stood up from the desk, my joints popping softly in the quiet room. I walked out of the command center, the heavy biometric door hissing shut and sealing automatically behind me. I moved down the hallway of the penthouse, the thick carpet silencing my steps. I passed the guest suite. The door was closed. I could hear the steady rhythm of Kimiko's breathing inside. I walked into my own bedroom, not bothering to turn on the lights. I stripped off my dark clothes, letting them fall to the floor, and slid into the immaculate silk sheets of the master bed. I closed my eyes, wrapping the silence around me like a blanket. P.S. Sorry for the delay in the bonus chapter. I was busy with hospital paperwork because of the March ending, financial year stuff, haha. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 60, chapter 60, Homelander. Homelander stood at the head of the long mahogany table in conference room A on the 99th floor of Vought Tower. He was standing with his back to the room, staring out the floor to ceiling windows at the city that sprawled beneath him like a nervous subject. His hands were clasped behind his back, his cape hanging perfectly still. The rest of the 7 filed in, one by one, their boots clicking on the expensive carpet. They moved with a strange mixture of arrogance and wariness, like wolves entering the den of a hungrier wolf. Queen Maeve entered first, her expression bored. She dropped into her seat, smelling faintly of mouthwash and stale vodka. Black Noir followed, taking his place and folding his hands on the table. The Deep walked in, looking around nervously, desperate to gauge the mood of the room. A-Train was the last of the veterans, his leg jittering, his eyes darting around the room with the frantic energy of a man whose heart was beating too fast. And then there was Starlight. She walked in with her head held high, wearing the revealing costume Vought had forced upon her. She took her seat. No one spoke. No one dared to break the silence while Homelander was staring out the window. The silence stretched for a minute, 2, 3. Finally, Homelander turned. His face was a mask of paternal disappointment. It was the face he wore on talk shows when discussing a national tragedy. But his eyes were blue ice. "We have a problem," Homelander said, his voice soft, modulated perfectly to carry across the room without raising a decibel. He picked up a remote from the table and clicked it. The large screen at the far end of the room flickered to life. A high-resolution image appeared. It was Huey Campbell. Starlight felt her stomach drop through the floor. Her breath hitched in her throat, and she had to use every ounce of her willpower to keep her face neutral. "This," Homelander said, pointing a gloved finger at the screen, "is Hugh Campbell, a retail employee from an electronics store in the city." He clicked the remote again. A new image appeared. It showed Huey and Billy Butcher standing together on a platform. He and his little friends, Homelander announced, they kidnapped Translucent, and they killed him. Starlight's mind was racing. "That," Starlight started, her voice trembling slightly before she steadied it. "That doesn't make sense. Look at him. He's just a human. How could he kill Translucent? Translucent is indestructible." Homelander looked down at her. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Indestructible on the outside, Annie. You all have soft spots." He walked back to the head of the table. "But that's not all. This little group, they've also been blackmailing." He turned his gaze to A-Train. "Why don't you tell the class about your girlfriend?" A-Train flinched as if he'd been struck. He looked up, sweat beading on his forehead. "Homelander, I." "Tell them," Homelander commanded. A-Train swallowed hard. She was my girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, she was leaking secrets." Starlight stared at him. "Leaking secrets?" "To them," Homelander interjected, pointing at the screen, "to Campbell and his butcher friend. She told them things she shouldn't have. She betrayed us. Betrayed you, Reggie." A-Train nodded jerkily. Yeah, she did." "And what happened to her, Reggie?" Homelander asked, his voice deceptively gentle. She died," A-Train mumbled. "Ow." "Overdose," A-Train said, his voice barely a whisper. "Heroin." "An overdose," Homelander repeated. He looked at Starlight. "Everyone seems to be dying of accidents lately. Which brings me to you, Starlight." The room went deathly silent. "You've been spending a lot of time with Mr. Campbell," Homelander said. Starlight froze. We went on a date once. I didn't know he was this. Didn't you? Homelander asked. He leaned down, his face inches from her ear. It's a hell of a coincidence, Annie. Dating the very man who killed Translucent. I swear, Starlight said, turning to look at him, putting every ounce of sincerity she possessed into her voice. I didn't know. He seemed nice. I had no idea. Homelander stared at her. His eyes scanned her face, her pupils, her pulse. His eyes began to glow. A red light bathed the side of her face. If I find out you're helping them, Homelander whispered, the sound like grinding stones. She didn't know, John. A voice cut through the tension. Homelander looked up. Queen Maeve was leaning back in her chair, looking bored. Look at her, Maeve said, gesturing vaguely at Starlight. She's a corn-fed cheerleader from Iowa. She probably thought he was cute and harmless. She's got bad taste, not a death wish. Homelander looked at Maeve, then back at Starlight. The red glow in his eyes faded. Bad taste, Homelander mused. He squeezed Starlight's shoulder, hard enough to bruise, then let go. Let's hope that's all it is. He walked back to the window, dismissing them. Find him, Homelander commanded, looking out at the city. And when you do, bring them to me, alive. Meeting adjourned. Starlight stood up, her legs shaking. She walked out of the room, forcing herself not to run. The afternoon sun in the penthouse was warm. I was lying on the massive sofa in the living room, a tablet in my hand, scrolling through the encrypted reports from the clones at Spencer Industries. The purge of the traitorous elements was nearly complete, disguised as a corporate restructuring. The funds were flowing back in. Kimiko was sitting on the other end of the sofa, her legs tucked under her. She was watching TV, an American sitcom this time, something bright and loud with a laugh track. She was wearing a pair of gray leggings and a white t-shirt. She was laughing at something on the screen, a shaking of her shoulders. I watched her for a moment. She had come so far in such a short time, but there was still a wall, a barrier that separated her from the world. Her voice. She wasn't mute because of a physical injury. It was because of severe psychological trauma from her childhood. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 61, chapter 61, Kimiko bonus chapter. I sat up, setting the tablet aside. Kimiko, I said softly. She turned to look at me, her eyes bright. She pointed at the TV, grinning. I know, I smiled. It's funny. I turned my body towards her. Give me your hand. She hesitated for a second, her smile fading slightly. She looked at my hand, then at my face, searching for intent. Finding nothing but calm, she reached out and placed her hand in mine. Her palm was warm. I activated biokinesis, Tier 1. I could feel her biology. I could sense the rush of blood through her veins, the density of her superhuman muscles, the rapid firing of her synapses. I traced the pathways of her nervous system, following them up her arm, through her spine, and into the complex architecture of her throat and brain. I confirmed what I already suspected. There was no scar tissue blocking her speech. There was no severed nerve. The block was entirely psychosomatic, a mental dam holding back the river. I never told you about all of my powers, did I? I asked, keeping my voice conversational. She shook her head, watching me curiously. You know I have the power of ice, I said. I held up my free hand. I focused on the moisture in the air above my palm. A perfect snowflake formed, spinning gently. She nodded. She remembered the snowflake from the gym. Ice is not just for freezing, I lied smoothly. In the right hands, cold can be used to heal. It can reduce inflammation, reset nerves, calm the body so it can repair itself. It's a very delicate process. I looked her in the eye. I think I can fix your voice. She pulled her hand back slightly, a reflex of fear and hope. Will you let me try? I asked. It won't hurt, I promise. She stared at me. I could see the war in her eyes. Slowly, very slowly, she nodded. Okay, I said, come here. She scooted closer on the sofa until she was sitting right in front of me. Close your eyes, I whispered. Focus on your breathing. She closed her eyes. Her eyelashes fluttered against her cheeks. She was trembling slightly. I reached out and placed my hand gently on her throat. My thumb rested lightly against her larynx. I activated cryokinesis. I lowered the temperature of my skin just enough to be noticeable. A cool wave of cold radiated from my hand into her neck. It was calming like an ice pack on a fever. Then, biokinesis. I reached into her biology. I stimulated the nerves surrounding her vocal cords. I sent a gentle cascade of bioelectric signals, creating a tingling sensation deep inside her throat. A feeling of blood flow increasing, of muscles waking up, of energy returning to a dormant place. Feel that? I whispered. That's the cold working. It's reconnecting the pathways. She nodded, a tiny movement under my hand. She felt it. The physical sensation validated the lie. I held the connection for a minute, letting the sensation build, letting her belief solidify. There, I said softly, the connection is reformed. I slowly withdrew my hand. The cool sensation lingered on her skin. Open your eyes. She opened them. They were wet with unshed tears and wide with anticipation. She touched her throat, her fingers tracing the spot where my hand had been. It is healed, I said, projecting absolute confidence. You can speak now. She opened her mouth. She tried to force air through her vocal cords. Her lips moved. Her throat worked. But nothing came out, just a rush of breath. She tried again, straining. Her face crumpled. A tear escaped and rolled down her cheek. She shook her head, looking down, shame and devastation radiating off her. Hey, I said gently, reaching out and lifting her chin so she had to look at me. Don't panic. It's still weak. It's like a muscle you haven't used in years. You have to teach it how to work again. I smiled at her. Start small, just make a sound, any sound. She looked at me, doubt clouding her eyes. Like a baby, I teased. Small noise, go on. She took a shaky breath. She closed her eyes again. She concentrated. H. It was a rough rasp, but it was a sound. She opened her eyes, surprised. See, I said, it's there, again. She took a deeper breath. She pushed from her diaphragm. Ayla. It was cracked and dry, but it was unmistakably a vocalization. Good, I encouraged, again. Ayla. It was louder this time. She laughed. It was a startled sound that bubbled up from her chest. Hathy. You're doing it, I laughed with her. She touched her throat again, feeling the vibration. She looked at me, a dazzling smile breaking through the tears. She made the sound again, just to prove she could. Okay, I said. Now let's try a word, something simple. I pointed to myself. Say my name. She watched my lips. She took a breath. Ada. She stopped, frustrated. Slowly, I said, Aryan. She concentrated, her brow furrowing. She formed the shape with her mouth. Yan. It was whispery, but it was my name. Yes, I cheered, clapping my hands together softly. Perfect, Aryan. She beamed. Aryan, she repeated, the word stronger this time. Okay, now the important part, I said, grinning. Repeat after me. Aryan is the best. She blinked. She understood the words. She understood the English I had been teaching her. She rolled her eyes, her smile turning into a smirk. Aryan, she rasped. Is, I prompted. Is the best. She paused. She looked at me, her eyes dancing with mischief. She took a deep breath. Aryan is idiot. I burst out laughing. It was a belly laugh that echoed in the penthouse. She joined in, her laughter a raspy sound that filled the room. Okay, I said, wiping a tear from my eye. But seriously, try it. Aryan is handsome. She giggled, no. Come on, I pleaded mockingly. For my ego, just once. She took a breath, composing herself. She looked at me, her expression softening. Aryan, she said, her voice growing steadier with every syllable. Is. She paused, searching for the word in her new vocabulary. Some. There it is, I said, see. The ice doesn't lie. She laughed again. Handsome, she repeated, testing the word. Handsome. We spent the next hour like that, playing with words like new toys. We went through the names of the food we had eaten. Fish. Rice. Apple. We went through the things in the room. Table. Window. Sky. Her voice was hoarse and her accent was thick, but she was speaking. Finally, her voice started to give out, her throat sore from the exertion. "Rest now," I said, handing her a glass of water. "Don't overdo it. The healing needs time to set." She took the water and drank greedily. She set the glass down and looked at me. She reached out and took my hand. She squeezed it hard. She looked at me, her dark eyes searching mine. Then, she moved forward, closing the space between us until her lips met mine. I was surprised, my pulse quickening, but I immediately responded, pulling her closer and wrapping my arms around her. She leaned into the embrace, her hands sliding up to grip the fabric of my t-shirt. After a while, she pulled back, breathless, our foreheads resting against each other as we both struggled to regulate our breathing. "Thank you," she whispered. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 62, Chapter 62, Soldier Boy 1. The digital map of the world glowed on the main monitor of my command center, a sprawling tapestry of geopolitical borders and hidden secrets. However, my eyes were fixed on a single coordinate deep, within the frozen wastes of Siberia. Target designation, Omsk 45. Status, active Russian military black site. Asset contained, subject Ben/Soldier Boy. In the original timeline, Butcher and his crew would eventually stumble their way to Russia, tearing through contacts and causing chaos to find the weapon that killed Soldier Boy, only to find Soldier Boy himself. I closed my eyes and reached into the well of my power. Cloning Tier 2. The familiar sensation of cellular division washed over me. The air shimmered, and a single figure materialized in front of the desk. He looked exactly like me. He cracked his neck, the sound loud in the quiet room. Then the clone nodded. He focused on his own mass. Size alteration, Tier 3. The clone began to shrink. He compressed rapidly, the air rushing in to fill the void where a 6-foot man had stood. In seconds, he was a speck on the carpet. He looked up at me, a giant towering above him, and then he vanished. Teleportation, Tier 1. Snap. Clone's perspective. The world was a series of snapshots, a strobing slideshow of environments as I crossed the globe in heartbeat intervals. Snap. I appeared hovering 10 feet above the rolling, black waves of the Atlantic. The salt spray hit me instantly. I was a tiny speck in the vastness of the ocean. Before gravity could take hold, I locked onto the next coordinate. Snap. A rocky cliff face, wind howling, rain lashing against the stone. I was there for a fraction of a second, just long enough to reorient. Snap. A rooftop overlooking the sleeping city. The air was colder here, carrying the scent of urban decay. Snap. Endless forest, dark pine trees stretching out under a vast sky. Snap. The temperature plummeted as I materialized in the snow. The cold was a biting freeze that would have killed a normal human in minutes. But to my Tier 1 super defense, it was merely a crispness to the air. I was 500 meters from the facility entrance. It was a concrete scar on the landscape, surrounded by high fences topped with razor wire and guard towers sweeping the snow with searchlights. It looked abandoned, a relic of the Soviet era left to rot, but the thermal signatures I picked up with my enhanced senses, Tier 2, told a different story. There were heat sources below ground, and the rhythmic thrum of heavy generators vibrating through the permafrost. Super speed, Tier 1. The world froze. The snowflakes drifting down from the sky hung suspended in the air, crystalline sculptures of ice. The sweeping searchlight beam became a solid pillar of light. I was a microscopic bullet tearing across the snow. I moved between the flakes, dodging them like obstacles. I crossed the open ground in a fraction of a second, the friction of my passing melting a tiny trench in the ice that would refreeze instantly. I reached the main ventilation intake at the base of the central bunker. The fan blades were spinning, a blur of metal chopping the air. To me, in my accelerated state, they were moving in slow motion. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. I passed through the fan blades with inches to spare, landing on the dusty metal of the duct floor. I released the speed. The world snapped back to real time. I navigated the ventilation system, a labyrinth of rusted steel and recycled air. I reached a heavy grate looking down into a laboratory. I peered through the mesh. It was an industrial dungeon. Concrete walls stained with decades of grime. Banks of outdated computer consoles flickering with green text. In the center of the room was a containment chamber, a capsule of reinforced glass and lead. And inside, strapped to a vertical table like a specimen, was Soldier Boy. He was shirtless, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Tubes ran into his arms and neck, pumping the yellowish nerve agent into his system. A team of 4 scientists in full hazmat suits moved around the chamber, checking readings. 2 armed guards, also in hazmat gear, stood by the door. I slipped through the grate and dropped to the floor, landing silently on top of an instrument trolley. I jumped from the trolley to the floor, then ran up the side of the containment chamber. The glass was cold. I climbed to the top, finding the seam where the intake tubes entered the capsule. There was a small gap in the rubber seal, barely wide enough for me. I squeezed through. The air inside the capsule was toxic. The concentration of Novichok was lethal enough to kill an elephant instantly. My regeneration, Tier 1, identified the toxin, isolated it, and neutralized it before it could bond to my neurotransmitters. To me, it just smelled like spicy pepper. I crawled down the tube, descending onto Soldier Boy's shoulder. His skin radiated a palpable heat. Even sedated, his body was a furnace. I could feel the hum of the radiation beneath his skin, a low-frequency vibration that rattled my teeth. I walked across his collarbone and stood directly over his sternum. I could hear his heart. It thudded like a heavy piston. Clang! Clang! I placed my hands flat against his skin. Biokinesis Tier 1. My mind is flooded with biological data. I saw the map of his anatomy. It was a masterpiece of forced evolution. His cells were saturated with energy, but it was the radiation that interested me. I found the source. It was the cells themselves. They were generating high-energy particles, a constant nuclear decay that his body usually contained and regulated. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 63, Chapter 63, Soldier Boy 2, bonus chapter. I pushed my consciousness deeper, down to the cellular level. I found the mitochondria of his cells, the power plants. They were glowing with a sickly green energy. I stripped away the biological dampeners. I rewrote the genetic instruction that told his cells to hold the energy. I changed the command to release. Beneath my hands, I felt his skin twitch. The heat radiating from him spiked. Soldier Boy's eyes snapped open. He gasped, a sound like a vacuum seal breaking. He strained against the straps, metallic chains groaning. "What?" he choked out, his voice a distorted rasp. The scientists outside the glass began to panic. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed. Energy spike, one of them screamed in Russian. Core temperature is rising, he is waking up. Increase the dosage, another shouted. The radiation pouring off him was intense. The radiation washed over me, but it found no compound V in my blood to burn. He was getting hotter and hotter. I channeled my other power. Cryokinesis Tier 1. I focused the entirety of my cold manipulation into my hands, pressing them harder against his burning chest. I pulled the thermal energy out of his sternum, dropping the surface temperature of his skin to absolute zero in a nanosecond. The reaction was catastrophic. Inside his chest, the nuclear fire was raging at thousands of degrees. On the surface, the skin and bone froze instantly, becoming brittle as glass. The temperature differential was impossible. Soldier Boy screamed. It was a sound that shattered the glass of the containment pod. The feedback loop hit critical mass. The energy tried to push out, but the frozen flesh couldn't expand. Pressure. Infinite pressure. I triggered my escape. Teleportation Tier 1. Snap. I appeared on a snowy ridge 2 kilometers away, overlooking the base. I was still tiny, standing on the branch of a pine tree. I returned to full size, balancing on the thick limb and watched. For a second, nothing happened. Then the ground heaved. A dome of blinding light erupted from the center of the base, expanding outward at supersonic speed. The concrete bunker vaporized. The guard towers turned to dust. The fence, the trees, the snow, everything within a 500-meter radius was simply erased. The shockwave hit me a second later, a wall of wind and sound that rattled the trees, but I held my ground, my Tier 1 strength anchoring me. A mushroom cloud, glowing with an eerie green hue, rose into the night sky. I waited for the dust to settle. The crater was glowing, the earth fused into glass. Teleportation. Snap. I materialized in the center of the crater. The heat was intense, residual radiation crackling in the air. The ground was slag. In the center of the devastation, lying in a pool of cooling glass, was what remained of Soldier Boy. His Tier 1 super defense had kept his body mostly intact, but he was undeniably dead. His chest was cracked open like a geode where the thermal shock had occurred. His skin was gray, burned, and frozen all at once. His face was frozen in a rictus of agony. The blast had killed him from the inside out. I walked over to the body. I placed my hand on his shoulder. The body vanished into system inventory. I stood alone in the smoking crater. I focused on my form. Shapeshifting Tier 3. My bones cracked and shifted. My muscles broadened. My height increased by 2 inches. My face reshaped itself, the jaw squaring, the nose breaking and healing, the stubble sprouting. In seconds, standing in the crater was Soldier Boy. I looked down at my hands. They were his hands. I rolled my neck. I smiled. It was the smile of a man who knew he was the only apex predator left in the jungle. Homelander, I said, my voice a perfect gravelly match for Jensen Ackles. Teleportation. Snap. Arian's perspective, the penthouse. System, I said, show me the harvest. The interface lit up. Soup neutralized. Soldier Boy Ben. Powers detected. Super Strength Tier 1, Super Defense Tier 1, Super Stamina Tier 1, Radiation Blasts Tier 1, Disempowerment Tier 1, Immortality Tier 2, Regeneration Tier 2, Enhanced Senses Tier 2. Choose option, retain or convert. Retain Radiation Blasts Tier 1, I ordered. Retain Super Stamina Tier 1, Immortality Tier 2, and Disempowerment Tier 1. Convert the rest. Processing. Powers Super Strength Tier 1, Super Defense Tier 1, Regeneration Tier 2, Enhanced Senses Tier 2 converted to XP. Plus 16000 XP. Duplicate power detected. Super Stamina Tier 2, converting to experience points. Conversion complete. You have gained 3000 XP. Powers Radiation Blast Tier 1, Disempowerment Tier 1, Super Stamina Tier 1, and Immortality Tier 2 successfully integrated. A surge of heat flooded my chest, radiating through my limbs. I felt my stamina expand instantly, the very concept of fatigue becoming an alien notion. And immortality? It was a subtle, grounding shift, a locking of my cells into a state of permanent perfection. System, pull up the final status. The interface refreshed, the blue text glowing with an undeniable finality. Final status. Host, Arian Spencer. Current XP, 19,100. Powers. Telepathy, Tier 1. Biokinesis, Tier 1. Cryokinesis, Tier 1. Resurrection, Tier 1. Super Speed, Tier 1. Teleportation, Tier 1. Regeneration, Tier 1. Super Stamina, Tier 1. Super Defense, Tier 1. Super Strength, Tier 1. Radiation Blast, Tier 1. Disempowerment, Tier 1. Cloning, Tier 2. Telekinesis, Tier 2. Immortality, Tier 2. Enhanced Senses, Tier 2. Shapeshifting, Tier 3. Size Alteration, Tier 3. Goal, 100 Power Stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. Power Stone Progress Update, 52-100. 64, Chapter 64, Soldier Boy 3, Clone's Perspective. I marched south, toward the lights of civilization I had spotted on the descent. 3 hours later, the lights resolved into an industrial outpost. I found a dive bar on the outskirts. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, spelling out vodka in Cyrillic. I pushed the heavy metal door open and stepped inside. The bar was populated by men who looked like they carved a living out of rock. I was shirtless, covered in soot, wearing tattered military pants. A man at the bar, a giant with a shaved head and a neck tattoo of a spider, stood up. He said something in Russian, his tone aggressive. "I need a drink," I said in English. The giant laughed. He walked over, his friends flanking him. He pulled a knife from his belt. "American," the giant spat in broken English. He lunged. The knife aimed for my gut. I let the blade hit my stomach. Tink! The metal tip snapped off against my skin. The giant froze, staring at the broken weapon. He looked up at my face. I grabbed his wrist. I head-butted him. Cracked. His nose collapsed into his skull. He dropped to the floor like a sack of wet cement. The other 3 men rushed me. One swung a pool cue. It shattered over my shoulder. I backhanded him, sending him flying through a table. The 3rd man tried to punch me. I caught his fist and twisted it. The sound of his shoulder popping out of the socket was loud in the silence. I walked to the bar. The bartender, a skinny man with terrified eyes, was shaking. "Whiskey," I said, "and a phone." He scrambled to pour a glass, spilling half of it. He pushed his own cell phone across the counter. I downed the whiskey in one swallow. It tasted like gasoline. I picked up the phone. I accessed the local network looking for a fixer, someone who moved people across borders. I found a number on a local forum for illicit goods. I dialed. "Duh," a voice answered. "I need a passport," I said, "and a ticket to New York." "Who is this?" "Money," I said. "I have money." I looked at the unconscious giant on the floor. I crouched down and rifled through his pockets. A thick wad of rubles, a gold chain, and a heavy watch. "Meet me at the airfield," I said. The fixer was a greasy man named Yuri. He met me in a hangar at the private airfield. He had 2 bodyguards with AK-47s. "You have the money?" Yuri asked, eyeing my stolen clothes, a leather jacket and jeans I had taken from one of the bar patrons. I tossed the roll of cash and the gold on the table. "That's the down payment." Yuri counted it. "This gets you the paper, the flight, that costs more." I stepped closer. The bodyguards raised their rifles. I ignored them. I looked Yuri in the eye. I reached into the mental reservoir of my abilities. Telepathy Tier 1. I pushed a suggestion. "You want to help me, you want to please me." "The flight is on the house," I said, my voice calm. "Consider it an investment in future relations." Yuri blinked. His eyes glazed over for a split second. "An investment," he repeated dully. "Yes, of course. We have a cargo plane leaving for JFK in 20 minutes. You can take the jump seat." "Good," I said, "the passport." He handed me a freshly printed booklet. The photo was a generic likeness, but the chips were encoded. "Thank you for your service, comrade," I said, patting his cheek. I walked toward the plane. New York City. I walked out of the cargo terminal, ignoring the customs agents who seemed to coincidentally look the other way as I passed, another subtle nudging of perception. A dusty apartment in the East Village. I kicked the door in. The legend was sitting in a recliner, surrounded by stacks of Vought comic books and old VHS tapes. He jumped, spilling his drink. "Jesus Christ," he wheezed. "Are you trying to give me a heart attack?" I stepped into the light. The legend's jaw dropped. His cigar fell from his mouth. "Ben," he whispered, "no. No, you're dead, the Russians." "Where is it?" I said. "Where is what?" "My suit, legend, my shield. Don't tell me you sold it." I kept it," he stammered, standing up on shaky legs. "In the storage locker, back room." "Good boy." I walked to the back room. There was a metal trunk. I ripped the padlock off. Inside, resting on velvet, was the suit, the dark green tactical gear, the eagle on the shoulder, the heavy brass shield. I stripped off the stolen clothes. I pulled on the pants, the boots, the heavy vest. It fit perfectly. I picked up the shield. I walked back into the living room. The legend was staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. "You look exactly the same," he said. "You haven't aged a day." "I need a location," I said. "For who?" "Countess," I said. "Where is she?" "Ben, don't," Legend said, raising his hands. She's moved on. She's got a gig." "Where?" I asked, my voice hardening. "The Chimp Sanctuary," Legend sighed. "In Vermont." Vermont, I repeated. Thanks, Legend. I turned to leave. Ben, Legend called out. What are you going to do? I looked back over my shoulder. I'm getting the band back together. The Crimson Countess Chimp Sanctuary was a sad collection of cages and overgrown grass in the middle of nowhere. I walked up the gravel driveway. The sign was faded. I could hear the shrieking of chimps in the distance. I reached the main building. It was a trailer, really. I grabbed the door handle and ripped the door off its hinges. Inside, the air smelled of incense and animal musk. Crimson Countess was standing in front of a ring light and a webcam. She was wearing a silk robe, singing a ballad about chimpanzees. Chimps don't cry, she warbled. I stepped into the frame. She stopped, the music cut out. She stared at me, her eyes widening until I thought they might pop out of her skull. Ben, she whispered. Hello, Countess, I said. You're real. She backed away, knocking over the ring light. But, we thought. You thought I was dead, I said, walking closer. Or did you just hope? No, Ben, I swear. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I loved you. We all did. We searched for you. Vought said you were dead. Did they? I asked. Or did you make a deal? Did you trade me for a paycheck? No, never. Liar, I said. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 65, chapter 65. Soldier Boy 4, she raised her hands, her eyes glowed red. Fireballs formed in her palms, she threw the fire. The balls of plasma hit my chest. They exploded, engulfing me in flame. I walked through the fire. My Tier 1 super defense absorbed the heat like a stone absorbing sunlight. The flames licked at my suit, scorching the fabric, but leaving me untouched. I reached her. I grabbed her by the throat and lifted her off the ground. She clawed at my arm, her fireballs sputtering out against my skin. Ben, please, please. You let me rot, I said, for 30 years in a box. It wasn't my idea, she choked out. It was Noir. He said you were out of control. And you listened, I said. I was scared. You should be. My chest began to glow. An ominous thrumming sound filled the trailer. Countess's eyes went wide. She saw the light building beneath my skin. Ben's no. I released it. Boom. The beam of pure radioactive energy erupted from my chest. It hit her at point-blank range. Her flesh, her bones, they were all instantly vaporized into ash. The blast blew the back of the trailer out, sending a plume of fire and debris into the woods. I dropped the charred remains of her robe. I stood in the burning wreckage. Mindstorm. A cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. Miles from the nearest road. I walked through the forest. I saw the tripwire, a claymore mine strapped to a tree. I stepped on the wire. Click, boom. The explosion engulfed me in shrapnel and fire. I walked out of the smoke, brushing dirt off my shoulder. I kept walking. Another mine. Another explosion. I reached the clearing. The cabin was dark. Go away, a voice shouted from inside. It was terrified. I see you in my head. Open the door, Mindstorm, I called out. No, you're just a bad memory. I walked to the door. I raised my shield. Crash. The door splintered. I stepped inside. Mindstorm was huddled in the corner, wearing dirty rags, a tinfoil hat on his head. He was shaking. He looked up. Don't look at my eyes. He screamed, don't look. He tried to scramble backward. I knew his trick. Eye contact trapped you in a nightmare, but it doesn't have any effect on me. You sold me out, I said. Noir, he babbled. He said Vought wanted to replace you. We were scared, Ben. You were mean. Mean, I laughed. I was a leader. You beat us, Mindstorm cried. I made you tough, I said, and you repaid me by selling me to the Russians. He tried to look at me, his eyes glowing. Just look at me, Ben. One look, we can go to a happy place. I threw the shield. Thwack. It hit him in the face. He was on the floor, his nose shattered, blood pouring down his face. I walked over. I picked up the shield. No happy places, I said. I brought the edge of the shield down. Crunch. I brought it down again. Crunch. And again. Crunch. 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 By the time I stopped, there was no face left. Vermont. Herogasm House. The TNT twins. Tommy and Tessa. I walked up the driveway. The house was a mansion, a temple to their faded glory. I kicked the front door open. "Hello," I shouted, "room service." They appeared at the top of the stairs. They looked old, saggy skin and bad dye jobs, and they were holding hands. "Soldier boy," Tessa gasped. "In the flesh," I said. "You," Tommy stammered, "you're supposed to be dead." "Surprise M***R," I said. They looked at each other, they clasped their hands tighter. Their hands began to glow. Their bioelectricity was charging up. "Do it, Tommy," Tessa screamed. A bolt of lightning arced from their joined hands. It hit me square in the chest. It tickled. I stood there, the electricity grounding out through my boots. I looked at the scorch mark on my breastplate. "Is that it?" I asked. They stared at me in horror. "You used to have more kick," I said. I started walking up the stairs. They turned to flee. I stopped on the landing. I focused the energy in my chest again. I released the blast. The beam of radiation tore through the house. It caught them as they ran down the hallway. They evaporated. The blast wave blew the roof off the mansion. The walls disintegrated. I stood in the ruins of the second floor, looking at the sky. The gun convention in Newark. Gunpowder. He was at a booth signing autographs. He looked older. He was telling a story to a kid about how he saved the president once. I walked through the crowd. People parted for me. They recognized the suit. They whispered, "Is that him? Is that soldier boy?" Gunpowder looked up. He saw me. His face went white. He dropped his pen. "Ben," he whispered. "Francis," I said, using his real name. He grabbed a pistol from the display table, a .50 caliber Desert Eagle, and fired. Bang! The bullet hit me in the forehead. It flattened and fell to the floor. The crowd screamed. People dove for cover. Gunpowder fired again and again. Bang! 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 Chest. Throat. Eye. The bullets bounced off. I kept walking. He threw the empty gun at me and ran. He vaulted over the table and sprinted for the exit. I followed. He reached the parking garage. He scrambled into his car. He fumbled with his keys. I reached the car just as he started the engine. I punched the hood. The engine block crumpled. The car died instantly. I ripped the driver's door off. Gunpowder scrambled into the passenger seat, pulling a shotgun from the glove box. He fired. Bang! The buckshot hit my face. I reached in and grabbed him by the throat. I dragged him out of the car and slammed him against a concrete pillar. "You were my squire," I said. "I taught you everything." "You just abused me," Gunpowder choked out. "I toughened you up," I roared, "and you sold me." I had no choice. There's always a choice, Francis. I threw him. He flew 20 feet and hit a parked van. He slumped to the ground, groaning. He looked up at me. He ricocheted a bullet off 3 cars, aiming for the back of my knee. It hit and bounced off. I walked over to him. He was trying to crawl away. I stepped on his leg. Snap! He screamed. "Please," he begged. "Ben, please." I looked down at him. I raised my shield. I brought the edge of the shield down on his neck. Crunch! 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 I stood in the silent parking garage, surrounded by the echoes of violence. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 66, chapter 66, Father and Son bonus chapter. Arian's perspective, the penthouse. The penthouse living room was bathed in the warm glow of the afternoon sun. I sat on the plush leather sofa, my body relaxed, sinking into the cushions. On the wall-mounted screen, a Korean variety show was playing, the volume turned low. Kimiko sat on the other end of the sofa, her legs tucked beneath her. System, I thought, my gaze fixed on a potted plant in the corner of the room. Tally the harvest. Right away, boss, the system replied, its voice buzzing with the satisfaction of a banker counting gold bars. It's a veritable garage sale of golden age superpowers. Let's process the inventory. The blue interface flickered into existence. Plunder queue processing. Soup neutralized, Crimson Countess Tier 3. Power, pyrokinesis, explosive energy generation. Choose option, retain or convert. Convert. Conversion complete, plus 1500 XP. Soup neutralized, Mindstorm Tier 3. Power, mental manipulation, psychic imprisonment. Choose option, retain or convert. Convert. Conversion complete, plus 1500 XP. Soup neutralized, Tommy Tier 3. Power, bioelectric energy blast. Choose option, retain or convert. Soup neutralized, Tessa Tier 3. Power, bioelectric energy blast. Choose option, retain or convert. Convert both. Conversion complete, plus 1500 XP. Conversion complete, plus 1500 XP. Soup neutralized, Gunpowder Tier 3. Power, projectile enhancement. Choose option, retain or convert. Convert. Conversion complete, plus 1500 XP. The notifications cleared. Harvest complete. Total XP GAINED, 7,500. Previous balance, 19,100. Current XP, 26,600. I let out a slow breath. 26,600 experience points. Enough to push many power to the upper echelons or to save for a rainy day. What are you thinking about? The voice was soft. I blinked, the blue interface vanishing from my vision. I turned my head. Kimiko had muted the TV. She was leaning forward, her chin resting on her palm, studying my face with an intensity that missed nothing. Nothing, I said, putting on my best innocent smile, just thinking about work, boring stuff, logistics and supply chains. Liar, she whispered, a playful smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. I'm serious, I protested, holding up my hands. I was thinking about shipping manifests, very riveting stuff. You wouldn't be interested. Really? She asked, sliding closer on the sofa. Really? I insisted, leaning back slightly. She reached out, her finger hovering inches from my ribs. You look serious, too serious for shipping manifests. I take shipping very seriously, I said, trying to maintain my composure. If the cargo is late, people get upset. It's a high-stress industry. Liar, she repeated. And then her fingers dug into my ribs. I jerked, a laugh escaping me before I could stop it. Hey, stop. She moved in, her attacks relentless. Confess, she said, her eyes dancing with mischief. What were you thinking? I told you, I gasped, trying to catch her wrists, but she was fast, slipping through my guard. Work, I was thinking about work. Boring, she declared, digging her knuckles into my side. Okay, I laughed, finally managing to pin her wrists. I pulled her hands away from my ribs, but she just used the leverage to launch herself forward, tackling me back into the cushions. I was thinking about how terrible that show is. I nodded at the TV. She paused, looking at the screen, then back at me. She burst out laughing, a genuine sound that filled the room. It is bad, she agreed, but the costumes are pretty. Vought Tower. 99th floor. Homelander sat at the head of the long table. He was staring at a glass of milk sitting in the center of the table. He was watching the way the light reflected off the white surface. His mind was a fractured landscape. He had killed Madeline. He had killed the only person who had ever offered him love. He had done it because she had lied to him, because she was afraid of him. And then he found the boy. Ryan. His son. He looked out the window. The city was down there, millions of ants scurrying about their meaningless lives. The silence of the room was shattered by the shrill ring of the secure telephone line on the side console. Once, twice, 3 times. Who would dare call him here, now? Finally, with a sigh of irritation that ruffled the papers on the table, he reached out and pressed the speaker button. What? He snapped. Yes, sir, the voice of a junior assistant trembled through the speaker. I apologize deeply for disturbing you. Then why are you speaking? Homelander asked, his eyes beginning to glow with a red heat. There's a call, sir, on the priority line. He insisted. Who? He claims to be Soldier Boy, sir. The red glow in Homelander's eyes vanished instantly. Soldier Boy, the legend. The man who had died a hero's death stopping a nuclear meltdown in 1984. The man whose statue stood in the plaza below. That's impossible, Homelander whispered. I told him that, sir, the assistant stammered. But he said you would want to hear this. Put him through, Homelander commanded. There was a click, a hiss of static, and then a voice filled the room. Is this really you? Homelander asked, his voice low. I thought we should have a conversation. The voice on the other end said. It was dripping with an old-school masculinity that sounded like unfiltered cigarettes and bourbon. I don't know who the F***K you think you are, Homelander snarled. 1980, the voice cut him off. I got called into Vogelbaum's lab for an experiment. Some S***T about genetics. Homelander froze. Vogelbaum, the man who had made him. I still remember the penthouse I used, the voice continued, rambling slightly like an old man recalling a fond memory. June, Danielle, great rack, bush like a Pomeranian. What? Homelander breathed, the absurdity of the detail catching him off guard. I beat my meat into a cup, the voice said bluntly. Required for the science, they said. Turns out Vogelbaum made a kid. Born spring 1981. A boy. Homelander gripped the edge of the table, the wood groaning under his fingers. 1981, his birth year. You know who the B***H is? The voice said, a bitter edge entering the tone. If they had just kept me around, I'd have let you take the spotlight. What father wouldn't want that for his son? Click. The line went dead. Homelander stood there, the phone humming with the dial tone. Father. The word bounced around his skull like a ricocheting bullet. Vought had told him he was grown from a test tube, a perfect creation with no parents. He was unique. He was the immaculate conception of American exceptionalism. But Soldier Boy was the only one who came close. Homelander looked at his reflection in the dark window. He looked at his jawline, his eyes. He launched himself from the room, the sonic boom of his departure shattering the expensive glass pitcher on the table. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 67, chapter 67, Black Noir, bonus chapter. The Vought archives were located in the sub-basement, 3 levels below the parking garage. It was a labyrinth of filing cabinets containing the dirty laundry of 70 years of corporate malfeasance. Homelander tore the steel door off its hinges. He moved through the aisles with super speed, a blur of blue and red. He used his X-ray vision, scanning through the metal drawers, reading the labels on the folders at the speed of light. 1978, 1979, 1980. He found the section. Project Chariot. He ripped the drawer open, metal screeching. He grabbed a handful of files, his hands shaking. He rifled through them, tossing papers into the air. Budget reports, chemical analysis, test subject fatalities. And then he found it. A single document stamped top secret. Subject, genetic donor protocol. Donor, Benjamin. Codename, Soldier Boy. Recipient sample, batch 4 alpha. Result, viable embryo. Subject designation, John. It was signed by Jonah Vogelbaum. Homelander stared at the paper. The ink was faded, but the truth was indelible. John, he whispered. He wasn't a test tube baby. He was a son. He had a father who was the greatest hero who had ever lived. A father who was alive. He dropped the paper. Vogelbaum knew, Edgar knew. They had lied to him for his entire life. They had deprived him of the one thing he had craved more than anything else, a family. And there was one other person who had been around back then. One person who had served with Soldier Boy. One person who was still here, in the tower, playing the loyal dog. Homelander's eyes began to glow. The quarters of the 7 were quiet. In his private room, Black Noir sat at a small Japanese whetstone, sharpening a combat knife. SHHHK. 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 The rhythmic sound was meditative. 2 beams of intense red heat sliced through the lock and the hinges, and the door fell inward with a heavy crash. Homelander stepped into the room. His face was a mask of eerie calm, but the air around him vibrated with a terrifying pressure. Black Noir set the knife down and stood up, turning to face his leader. He tilted his head slightly, a silent question. "You know what I realized?" Homelander asked, his voice soft. He began to circle Noir, moving slowly, studying the masked figure like a predator inspecting a trapped animal. "You're the only one who doesn't lie to me," Homelander said. "Everyone else. They all lie, they all have their agendas, they all wear masks." He stopped behind Noir, leaning in close. "But not you. You wear a mask, sure, but underneath it. You're loyal, you don't speak, so you can't lie." Noir stood still, his posture relaxed, accepting the praise. He nodded once. Homelander walked back around to face him. He smiled. He reached out and patted Noir on the shoulder. The impact was harder than a friendly pat should be. "You're the only one I can trust," Homelander said, "aren't you?" Black Noir raised his hand slowly. He gave a thumbs up. Homelander laughed. "See, you've always been there, standing in the back, watching." "So tell me about Soldier Boy," he said. "You were on his team. What was he like?" Noir paused. He seemed to hesitate. Then he reached for a notepad on his desk. He scribbled a single word and held it up. "Bad." Homelander stared at the word. "Bad," he repeated. "Come on, nobody is all bad. He was a hero." Noir shook his head. He wrote again, underlining the word. "Bad." "He is my father," Homelander said. The words hung in the air. Noir wasn't surprised. "I didn't believe him at first," Homelander whispered, stepping closer. "I ripped apart the company archives, and it's true." Homelander looked into the black lenses of Noir's mask. "You knew," Homelander said. Noir remained silent. "You knew," Homelander shouted, his voice cracking. "You knew I had a father out there, alive this whole time." Tears began to well up in Homelander's eyes. "You lied to me," he whispered, his voice trembling with a child's heartbreak. "My whole life. The one thing I needed most. A family, someone who could understand, and you kept it from me." Noir took a step back. He raised his hands in a placating gesture. He picked up the pen again, writing frantically. "Must kill him." Homelander looked at the note. He laughed, a sobbing sound. "I'm not sure I want to," Homelander said. "It's funny, you know? Everyone thinks of you as this unreadable sphinx, a mystery, but not me." Homelander activated his X-ray vision. He looked through the black fabric of the mask. "I see through that mask," Homelander whispered. "I mean literally, I can see your face. I can see the battle scars. That crooked smile of yours. I know when you're happy. I know when you're sad. I know when you're telling the truth." He leaned in, his nose almost touching the mask. "And I know when you're afraid." Noir dropped the notepad. He tensed, his body preparing for combat. "Did you know?" Homelander asked, tears streaming down his face. "Did you know he was my father?" Noir stared at him. F***K, Homelander sobbed. F***K, why didn't you tell me? Homelander drove his fist forward, with the crushing force of a hydraulic piston. Squelch. Homelander's fist punched through the Kevlar of Noir's suit. It punched through the skin, the muscle, the intestines, and the spine. It exited out the other side of Noir's back, coated in dark blood and viscera. Noir gasped. He looked down at the arm embedded in his gut. He looked up at Homelander. Homelander was crying openly now, his face twisted in a rictus of grief and rage. "You were the only one," Homelander wept. "You were supposed to be my friend." He ripped his arm back. Noir collapsed. He fell to his knees, clutching the gaping, ruinous hole in his stomach. Blood poured out onto the floor, pooling around his boots. He looked up at Homelander one last time. He reached out a shaking hand, perhaps for help, perhaps for forgiveness. Homelander stepped back, looking at the blood on his glove. He looked at the dying man who had been a silent fixture in his life for 20 years. Noir slumped forward. His head hit the floor. He twitched once and then he was still. Goal, 100 power stones, equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 68, chapter 68, Godolkin bonus chapter. Stan Edgar sat at his desk, the glow of his tablet illuminating his face in the dim pre-dawn light. He was looking at a live feed of the cleaning crews scrubbing blood out of the carpet in Black Noir's quarters. Knock, knock. Enter. Graves stepped inside. He looked worse than he had the day before. His suit was rumpled, his tie slightly askew, and there was a sheen of sweat on his forehead that the building's climate control couldn't mitigate. He carried a physical file folder. "Sir," Graves said, his voice tight, "we have an urgent situation. The threat assessment has evolved." Edgar took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly with a silk handkerchief. "Evolved? That is a polite way of saying deteriorated. Graves, tell me." Graves placed the folder on the desk. He opened it to the first page. It was a low-resolution printed photograph taken from a CCTV camera. The image showed a dive bar in Omsk, Siberia. The lighting was poor, but the figure standing at the bar was unmistakable. He was wearing stolen clothes, but the man underneath was a ghost Vought had buried decades ago. "Soldier boy," Edgar said, his voice dropping to a dangerous chill. "Confirmed," Graves said. "He escaped the Russian containment facility at Omsk 45. We don't know how. The facility went dark. Satellite thermal shows a massive energy discharge, consistent with a nuclear event, but localized." Edgar stared at the photo. Why is he still alive? The Russians were paid billions to keep dissecting him, not letting him walk out the front door. "It appears they failed, sir, and he killed everyone." Graves flipped the page. The next photo was high definition, taken from a bystander's smartphone in Newark, New Jersey. It showed a parking garage. It showed a man in a dark green tactical suit holding a heavy brass shield. And it showed what was left of the soup known as gunpowder. "He's here," Graves said. "He made landfall yesterday. He retrieved his gear from a storage unit in the East Village. Then he went to Newark." "And gunpowder." "Dead, sir. We suppressed the footage online, scrubbed the social media uploads, and paid off the witnesses. The official story is a gas main explosion in the parking structure. The public doesn't know Soldier Boy is back yet." Edgar stood up, walking to the window. He looked out at the city. "We are fighting a war on 3 fronts, Graves," Edgar said softly. "We have a rogue general building a soup army. We have a psychotic Homelander who just murdered Black Noir. And now the ghost of the Cold War has returned to haunt us." He turned back to Graves. "Keep monitoring his location." "We have a lock on his general trajectory," Graves said. "He seems to be hunting his old team." "Let him," Edgar said coldly. "They are depreciating assets. If he kills them, he saves us the severance packages. But we need to be ready to put him down when he's done." "The tactical team?" Graves asked. "Are they ready?" "Yes, sir," Graves nodded. 10 elite operators equipped with the new shipment from Spencer Industries. They are standing by at the secure hangar. "Good," Edgar said. Graves hesitated. "There is one more thing, sir, regarding the red unit." Edgar's eyes narrowed. "General Radek's men." "Yes, sir. We received a flag from the upstate monitoring grid. 2 more of our assets have gone dark. High-potential assets." "Who?" "The Morrow sisters," Graves said. "Marie and Annabeth. Marie was the only viable subject from the fetal injection program at Odessa. She was slated for Godolkin University next semester. She had immense potential." "Had?" "They're gone, sir. Disappeared from a safe house in Albany. No bodies were found, but the forensic team found trace amounts of slush, bloody ice residue that matched Marie's DNA. And the thermal scans from the Argus grid picked up a momentary temperature drop in the area." Edgar slammed his hand onto the desk, a rare display of emotion. "Radek's lieutenant," Edgar hissed. "It fits the profile, sir," Graves said. "Surgical removal of assets. No witnesses. They are cleaning up the loose ends from Odessa." F***K them, Edgar whispered. F***K General Radek and his arrogance. "What are your orders, sir?" "Send our counterintelligence teams to Fort Benning," Edgar said, straightening his tie. "Buy the officers in Radek's command. I don't care what it costs. Find out where those soldiers sleep and burn it to the ground." Clone perspective. The drive to the sprawling estate in the Westchester countryside was quiet. I sat in the back of the stolen sedan, my fingers drumming rhythmically on the shield. I parked the car at the edge of the wrought iron gate. I stepped out. The night air was cool. I walked to the gate. I grabbed the bars. Screech. The metal tore like wet paper. I tossed the twisted gate aside and walked up the long driveway. The house was dark, a Gothic mansion looming against the stars. I kicked the front door in. The wood shattered, splinters flying into the grand foyer. "Honey, I'm home," I shouted, my voice mocking. Silence answered me. I moved through the house, my boots heavy on the hardwood. I found the library. I ripped the bookcase away from the wall, revealing the steel door of the elevator shaft. I pried the doors open with my bare hands and looked down into the darkness. I jumped. I landed in the sub-basement with a heavy thud, cracking the concrete floor. The air down here was stale, smelling of antiseptic and rotting meat. I walked down the corridor, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I reached the main lab. And there he was. Thomas Godolkin. He was a withered body suspended in a tank of viscous fluid. Tubes ran into his spine, his neck, his eyes. His skin was gray, sloughing off in patches. He looked like a burn victim who had been kept alive solely by machinery and spite. He was floating there, eyes closed, a silent orchestrator of misery. I walked up to the tank. I tapped on the glass with the edge of my shield. "Tank, tank." "Wakey, wakey," I said. The eyes in the tank snapped open. They were milky white, blind, yet seeing everything. Suddenly, a pressure slammed into my mind. It was a psychic scream. "Leave." It was a telepathic push, designed to override the motor functions of the brain. The command echoed in my skull. "Turn around, walk away." P.S. I'm really sorry, guys, for not uploading chapters over the last 4 days. One of my colleagues was on leave, so we were short on doctors for night duty, and I had to cover his shift since he covered mine last time, haha. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 69, chapter 69, Stormfront, telepathy tier 1. I looked at the floating husk. I smiled. "No," I said. I pushed back. I drove a spike of tier 1 psychic energy directly into the tank, piercing the glass and slamming into Godolkin's consciousness. F***KU, I thought, projecting the words with the force of a tidal wave. Godolkin's body in the tank convulsed. The fluid bubbled. His mouth opened in a silent scream. "Who are you?" His mind shrieked, fear replacing the command. "I'm the janitor," I replied, "just cleaning up the trash." I raised my hand. Biokinesis tier 1. I reached out to the withered biology inside the tank. I accelerated the decay. The reaction was instantaneous. Godolkin's skin began to liquefy. His muscles detached from his bones. The water in the tank turned cloudy and red as he dissolved. The psychic pressure in my mind vanished, snuffed out like a candle. I watched for a moment as the last of Thomas Godolkin turned into soup. Disgusting, I muttered. I turned and walked away, leaving the tank bubbling in the dark. The city lights of New York were a blur beneath me as I stood on the roof of a high-rise apartment building in the Upper West Side. My next target lived here. Stormfront. Or Liberty. She was maintaining her cover, living among the people she secretly despised, building her social media following, waiting for Edgar to give her the green light. I adjusted the shield on my arm. I cracked my knuckles. I jumped from the roof, dropping down to her balcony on the penthouse level below. I landed heavily, cracking the expensive tiling. The curtains were drawn, but I could hear music inside. I smashed through the glass doors, the shards raining down onto the carpet. Stormfront was in bed. She was naked, tangled in sheets with 2 men, athletic, blonde, Nazi ideals of physical perfection. They scrambled back in terror as the glass exploded inward. Stormfront rolled out of bed, grabbing a silk robe and wrapping it around herself in a blur of motion. Her eyes, crackling with electricity, locked onto me. She froze. The lightning arcing between her fingers died down. Her mouth opened slightly. "No way," she whispered. I walked into the room, my boots crunching on the glass. I looked at the 2 terrified men cowering against the headboard. "Get out," I growled. They grabbed their clothes and sprinted for the door, scrambling over each other to escape the room. The door slammed shut. Stormfront stared at me. "Soldier boy," she breathed, "you look good for a dead man." "Liberty," I replied, "you look cheap." She laughed, a jagged sound. I go by Stormfront now. You know how it is. Where have you been, Ben? She asked, her eyes narrowing. She was scanning me. We heard stories. Russia. Russia, I confirmed. It was cold. The food sucked. And the hospitality left a lot to be desired. And now you're back, she said, taking a step toward me, her hands sparking again. For what? A reunion tour. Retirement, I said. Yours. She sneered. You think you can just waltz in here and threaten me? I'm not the same girl you knew in the 70s, Ben. You're just a Nazi B****H, I said flatly. She screamed, a sound of pure rage, and launched herself at me. She flew across the room, a bolt of purple lightning trailing behind her. She hit me square in the chest, the impact driving me backward through a wall. Dust and drywall choked the air. I shook my head, standing up in her living room. My chest plate was scorched, but the skin underneath was untouched. Tier 1 super defense. Is that it? I asked, dusting off my shoulder. She hovered in the hole in the wall, her hair floating around her face, electricity arcing from her body like a halo. You arrogant bastard, she hissed. She unleashed a torrent of plasma. It was a continuous stream of high-voltage energy. It slammed into me, engulfing me in purple fire. The heat was intense. The carpet caught fire. The furniture melted. I lowered my head and walked into the storm. I forced my way forward, step by agonizing step. The plasma pushed against me, a physical wall of force, but I was immovable. I reached her. I grabbed her ankle. Gotcha, I grunted. I slammed her into the floor. The impact shook the building. The floor cracked. She shrieked and blasted me in the face, point blank. My vision went white. I punched her. My fist connected with her stomach. She folded, gasping for air. I grabbed her by the throat and threw her across the room. She smashed into a bookshelf, sending books and trophies flying. She tried to fly up to regain the high ground. I threw my shield. Clang! The brass edge caught her in the shoulder, shattering her collarbone. She dropped out of the air, crashing onto the coffee table. I walked over to her. She was trying to crawl away, one arm hanging uselessly. She looked up at me, blood streaming from her nose. You, she wheezed, you're supposed to be old. I aged like wine, I said. You aged like milk. I grabbed her by the hair and hauled her up. I slammed her against the wall, pinning her there with my forearm across her throat. I felt the heat building in my chest. Her eyes widened. She felt the temperature rising. She saw the glow beneath my skin. Ben, wait, she pleaded, her bravado cracking. Wait, we can. We can work together. I have influence. We can rule this place, just you and me, like the old days. The old days are dead, I said, and so are you. I released the blast, a point-blank detonation of nuclear fury. The wall behind her evaporated. The ceiling blew upward. Stormfront screamed as her skin blistered and peeled away. Her regeneration factor tried to fight it, tried to knit the cells back together, but the radiation was too much. It attacked her on a genetic level, stripping away her powers, burning the compound V out of her blood. And then it burned the rest of her. The blast waved through me back. I landed on my feet in the center of the room, smoke curling from my suit. When the dust settled, there was nothing left of the wall. The night sky was visible through the gaping hole in the building. And on the floor, amidst the rubble, was a blackened husk. I walked over. I nudged the remains with my boot. They crumbled into ash. Auf Wiedersehen, goodbye, I whispered. I turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving the fire to consume what was left of liberty. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 70, chapter 70, Mr. President, bonus chapter. The silk sheets of the master bed were cool against my skin. I lay on my back, my hands resting behind my head, staring up at the darkened ceiling. My eyes were closed, my mind hovering in that liminal space between waking and sleeping. BZZT. The familiar chime echoed directly within my mind. I opened my eyes in the dark. Boss, you awake? The system asked, its digital voice practically humming with suppressed excitement. Because our boy in the green suit just clocked out for the night, and his timesheet is absolutely filthy. I've got the loot crates ready. Do you want to open them now or wait until morning? Now, I whispered into the quiet room. The holographic blue interface materialized above me. The text scrolled rapidly, detailing the clone's rampage through the hidden corners of the Soup underworld. Plunder Q, processing targets. Soup neutralized, Thomas Godolkin, Tier 2. Powers detected. Mind Control Tier 2, Possession Tier 2, Enhanced Senses Tier 2, Immortality Tier 2, Super Defense Tier 2. Choose option, Retain or Convert. I read over the list. Possession. Intriguing, but I already possessed Tier 1 telepathy. My control over the mind was absolute and spanned 100 kilometers. Convert them all, I commanded silently. Converting 5 Tier 2 powers. Conversion complete, plus 15000 XP. The number ticked up on my peripheral display. Next up, the big one, the Nazi lightning rod herself. Soup neutralized, Stormfront/Liberty, Tier 2. Powers detected. Electrokinesis Tier 2, Flight Tier 2, Super Strength Tier 2, Super Defense Tier 2, Regeneration Tier 2, Immortality Tier 2, Enhanced Senses Tier 2. Choose option, Retain or Convert. I stared at the first 2 items on that list. Flight. My teleportation was a tactical masterpiece. It allowed for instantaneous relocation, perfect infiltration, and impossible escapes, but it lacked the visceral dominance of actual flight. And electrokinesis, the ability to generate, manipulate, and project massive amounts of raw plasma and electrical voltage. It was the power of storms, a devastating elemental force that could fry electronics, stop hearts, or incinerate a target in a blinding flash. Retain flight and electrokinesis, I thought, my heart beating a fraction faster. Convert the rest. Oh, we're getting flashy now, I like it. Processing. Converting Super Strength Tier 2, Super Defense Tier 2, Regeneration Tier 2, Immortality Tier 2, and Enhanced Senses Tier 2. Conversion complete, plus 15000 XP. Powers Flight Tier 2 and Electrokinesis Tier 2 successfully integrated. Electrokinesis started at the base of my spine, a buzzing jolt that raced up my vertebrae and exploded into my nervous system. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I raised my right hand in the dark. I let the impulse flow. Violet arcs of pure electricity crackled between my fingertips, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The power hummed, a caged beast begging to be unleashed. I could feel the electrical currents in the walls of the penthouse, the hum of the television in the living room, the battery of my phone on the nightstand. I clenched my fist and the lightning snuffed out, reabsorbed into my biology. Flight was a fundamental decoupling from the laws of physics. The concept of gravity, an invisible force that had bound me to the earth since birth, lost its grip. I pushed the blanket aside. I willed myself upward. My body rose from the mattress. I floated 3 feet above the bed, suspended in the room. I tilted my head and my body drifted forward. I raised a hand and I ascended toward the ceiling. It felt as natural as breathing, a pure extension of my thought. I rotated in midair until my feet touched the floor. The weight of my body returned. Look at you, boss, the flying, freezing, zapping ghost. You're a one-man Avengers movie. Show me the final numbers, I said, a smile curling in the dark. Harvest complete. Previous balance, 26,600 XP. Godolkin conversions, plus 15000 XP. Stormfront conversions, plus 15000 XP. Current total XP, 56,600. 56,600 experience points. Show me the final status, I commanded. The interface shifted, projecting the full inventory of my existence. Final status. Host Arian Spencer. Current XP, 56,600. Powers. Telepathy Tier 1. Biokinesis Tier 1. Cryokinesis Tier 1. Resurrection Tier 1. Super Speed Tier 1. Teleportation Tier 1. Regeneration Tier 1. Super Stamina Tier 1. Super Defense Tier 1. Super Strength Tier 1. Radiation Blast Tier 1. Disempowerment Tier 1. Flight Tier 2. Cloning Tier 2. Telekinesis Tier 2. Immortality, Tier 2. Electrokinesis, Tier 2. Enhanced Senses, Tier 2. Shapeshifting, Tier 3. Size Alteration, Tier 3. White House. The Situation Room deep beneath the west wing of the White House smelled of old coffee, polished wood, and high-stakes anxiety. President Robert Dakota Bob Singer sat at the head of the heavy mahogany table, pinching the bridge of his nose. He looked exhausted, the lines on his face deeper than they had been a few weeks ago. The political maneuvering required to keep the soup military bill stalled in Congress was taking a toll. General Francis Higgins sat to his right, his uniform impeccable, his jaw set like a steel trap. Director Susan Rayner of the CIA sat to Singer's left, tapping a manicured fingernail against a secure tablet. Grace Mallory stood at the far end of the room, her hands resting flat on the table. She looked grim. "All right, Grace," Singer said, looking up. "You called this emergency session. Tell me you have good news regarding our Phantom platoon. Did they respond to the dead drop?" "They did, Mr. President," Mallory said, "but that is not why I called this meeting." Singer frowned. "Then what is it?" Mallory reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single manila folder. She slid it across the table toward Singer. 3 days ago, our satellite surveillance over the Siberian sector picked up a localized radiological thermal event, Mallory began. At first, the Pentagon thought it was a Russian tactical nuke test gone wrong, but the signature was completely anomalous. No fallout plume and no EMP spread, just a concentrated burst of energy. General Higgins grunted. "I saw the report. Omsk 45, an old Soviet black site, wiped off the map. You're saying this wasn't the Russians?" "I'm saying the Russians were the victims," Mallory corrected. She nodded toward the folder. "Open it." Singer opened the folder. Inside was a series of photographs. They were low-resolution shots taken from a variety of sources. A street corner CCTV camera in Moscow, a customs checkpoint at JFK, and finally, a cell phone video still from a parking garage in Newark, New Jersey. Singer stared at the photographs, his eyes widening slowly. "Is this a joke, Grace?" "No joke, Bob," Mallory said. Rayner leaned over, looking at the photos. She gasped, That's impossible." "I am looking at a man who has been dead since 1984, General Higgins said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He picked up the photo from the Newark parking garage. It clearly showed a man in a dark green tactical suit holding an eagle-embossed brass shield. He was standing over a pile of bloody rubble. "Soldier boy," Singer breathed, leaning back in his chair as if the photograph itself might bite him. "Vought said he died stopping a nuclear meltdown in Ohio." "Vought lied," Mallory stated flatly. "I dug into classified CIA archives from the Cold War era. Deep cover intercepts from Operation Chariot. He was captured by the Russians or sold to them. They kept him on ice for nearly 40 years. And now he's out," Higgins said, tracing the edge of the shield in the photo. "He survived a Russian black site, walked through customs, and executed a Vought asset in a public parking garage in New Jersey. Gunpowder, Rayner identified the victim. Found dead yesterday. Vought's PR machine is spinning it as a gas main explosion, but the local PD reports indicate blunt force trauma consistent with a blunt object. He's hunting his old team," Mallory said. Yesterday, local authorities in Vermont responded to an explosion at the chimp sanctuary run by Crimson Countess. Found a charred smear that matched her DNA. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 71, Chapter 71, Billy Butcher bonus chapter. "My God," Singer muttered. "If the public finds out Vought lied about his death, if they find out he's back." "Vought will welcome him back with open arms," Rayner said cynically. "They'll call it a miraculous return. They'll put him in a cereal box." "I don't think he's looking for a welcome home party," Higgins noted, his tactical mind analyzing the pattern. Singer looked at Mallory. A calculating gleam appeared in his eye. "Grace," Singer started, leaning forward, This could be an opportunity." Mallory narrowed her eyes. "Bob, don't say what I think you're going to say." "Think about it," Singer insisted, gesturing to the photos. "He hates Vought, and he has decades of operational experience. We are currently trying to funnel targets to our Phantom platoon to disrupt Vought. Should we establish contact with Soldier Boy? Bring him in? Offer him a pardon or a position? Use him as an official countermeasure against Vought? Absolutely not, Mallory snapped, her voice cracking like a whip. She slammed her hand flat on the table. Singer recoiled slightly. Grace, I'm just considering the strategic value. There is no strategic value, Mr. President, Mallory interrupted, abandoning protocol entirely. She glared at Singer, then at Higgins. You didn't read his classified psychological profile from the 70s, did you? I served with his team during Nicaragua. He was an American hero, Higgins argued defensively. The propaganda. The propaganda was bullshit, Mallory said coldly. He was a vicious, narcissistic, and arrogant thug who thought he was a god. He didn't follow orders, and he didn't care about collateral damage. He killed our own men in Nicaragua because he couldn't control his temper. He is a walking disaster with the emotional maturity of a schoolyard bully. She picked up the photo of the Newark parking garage and held it up. You want to try and put a leash on a man who has spent 40 years being tortured by Russians and who is currently murdering everyone he used to know. If you approach him, he will likely kill your agents, take your intelligence, and then do whatever the hell he wants. Mallory dropped the photo back onto the table. We are already dancing on a razor's edge with this Phantom platoon, she warned. At least they avoid civilians. Soldier Boy does not care. If we try to use him, it will blow up in our faces. Literally. Singer looked down at the photo. The color drained from his face. He rubbed his temples again. Fine, Singer conceded, his voice heavy. What do we do then? Rayner asked, looking between them. We monitor his movements, Higgins said grimly. We let him and Vought tear each other apart. And we pray to God he doesn't decide to march on Washington. The air in the safe house was thick with the smell of stale coffee, cold pizza, and nervous sweat. It was a disused auto repair garage on the outskirts of the Bronx, the windows boarded up, the heavy steel roll-up door padlocked from the inside. Huey Campbell sat on an overturned milk crate, his knees pulled up to his chest, staring blankly at the oil-stained concrete floor. Across the room, Mother's Milk was pacing. He was on a burner phone, his voice a low whisper. He was talking to Monique, ensuring she and Janine were still secure in the upstate safe house. He hung up the phone, rubbing his hand over his close cropped hair, the tension radiating off his massive frame. Frenchie was sitting at a workbench, meticulously dismantling and reassembling a high-caliber sniper rifle. The rhythmic clack-clack of the metal parts was the only constant sound in the room, a nervous tick masquerading as maintenance. The heavy metal door connecting to the office groaned, the hinges protesting. Billy Butcher walked in. He looked energized. He was wearing his long black coat, a wicked grin plastered across his face. He carried a ruggedized laptop under one arm and a thick manila folder under the other. Right, you miserable lot of wankers, Butcher announced, dropping the laptop onto the center table with a loud thud. Gather round. Daddy's home and he's brought presents. Mother's Milk stopped pacing and walked over. Frenchie set down the rifle bolt. Huey slowly stood up, looking like a man walking to the gallows, and shuffled toward the table. Butcher flipped the laptop open. He plugged in a secure USB drive and hit a few keys. Now, Butcher said, leaning his hands on the table and looking at his crew, we've had a bit of a rough patch. Got Vought breathing down our necks with this Z-drug bollocks. We need a win. We need a bloody big win. We need to stay underground, Butcher, Mother's Milk argued, his voice a low rumble. They are sweeping the city. If they catch a whiff of us, we are dead. They're looking for someone else, Mother's Milk, Butcher grinned. And while they're looking left, we are gonna hit them right in the bollocks. He hit the space bar. The video filled the screen. It was CCTV footage from a parking garage. It showed a man in a dark green suit, holding a brass shield, standing over the bloody body of a man. The camera had captured the moment perfectly. The man in green bringing the edge of the shield down on the victim's neck with sickening force. Huey flinched, looking away from the violence. Who is that? He whispered. That, my fragile little friend, is Gunpowder, Butcher said, pointing at the dead man on the screen. Former member of Payback. Arrogant prick with a gun fetish. And the other one, Frenchie asked, his eyes narrowing as he studied the green suit. The costume, it looks familiar, no? Butcher slapped the manila folder onto the table. An old friend of mine has been very busy. This footage was suppressed by VOD an hour after it happened. Butcher tapped the screen, pointing to the man with the shield. That, Butcher said, his grin widening into something manic, is Soldier Boy. Mother's Milk stared at the screen, his jaw dropping. Bullshit. Soldier Boy died in a nuclear reactor in the 80s. My daddy used to read me the comics. Your daddy read you VOT propaganda, Butcher corrected. Russians had kept him on ice. But a few days ago, he broke out. He blew up a Russian base, flew commercial back to the States, and is currently working his way through his old teammates. He killed Crimson Countess yesterday, Butcher continued, his eyes gleaming. Blew the TNT twins to Kingdom Come this morning. He is on a roaring rampage of revenge, right under Vot's nose. Mon Dieu, my God, Frenchie whispered, staring at the frozen image of the legendary hero. Why are you showing us this, Butcher? Mother's Milk asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Because, Butcher said, leaning in close, his voice dropping to a magnetic whisper. Homelander is invincible. We've tried bombs and we've tried blackmail. Nothing works. Butcher pointed a thick finger at the image of Soldier Boy. But this bloke is the original Homelander. He was the strongest thing on two legs before Vought upgraded the model. And right now, he hates Vought just as much as we do. Huey looked from Butcher to the screen and back again. The color drained from his face. No, you cannot be serious. Dead serious, Huey, Butcher said cheerfully. He's bashing a guy's head in with a piece of metal. Huey yelled, gesturing wildly at the screen. You want to go talk to him? I want to offer him a job, mate, Butcher smiled. You are insane, Mother's Milk said, taking a step back. He might kill us the second we look at him funny. He needs us, Butcher argued, slamming his hand on the table. He doesn't know where Vought hides their dirty laundry. We have the intel. He has the muscle. It's a match made in heaven. It's suicide, Frenchie stated calmly. It's our only bloody shot. Butcher roared, his charisma filling the room, overpowering their objections. Homelander is going to find us eventually. When he does, all your hiding, all your safe houses, won't mean S***T. He'll laser us and he'll laser your families. He locked eyes with Mother's Milk, holding his gaze until Mother's Milk looked away. Then he looked at Huey. Butcher pulled a small piece of paper from his pocket and tossed it onto the table. It had a set of coordinates written on it. My CIA bird gave me his trajectory, Butcher said. Butcher turned around, grabbing his coat. Pack your bags, boys, Butcher said, walking toward the garage door. We're going to meet a legend. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 72, chapter 72, The Boys. Perspective, Arian's clone, Soldier Boy. The night air at the edge of the city was thick with the smell of rusted iron and damp earth. It was an industrial graveyard, a sprawling expanse of abandoned warehouses and decaying factories left to rot by a dying economy. At the very edge of this desolation stood an empty farmhouse, its porch sagging under the weight of decades of neglect. I sat on the warped wooden railing of the porch, wearing the dark green tactical suit and the heavy brass shield resting against my knee. I drew a long drag from a thick Cuban cigar. The cherry glowed bright orange in the gloom, casting a warm light against the harsh angles of my stolen face. I exhaled, the thick plume of blue smoke curling into the cold air. A battered transit van slowly crunched up the gravel driveway. It came to a halt 20 yards from the porch, the headlights cutting through the darkness and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. 4 doors opened. Billy Butcher stepped out of the driver's side, the heavy fabric of his dark trench coat billowing slightly in the wind. He slammed the door, his eyes locked onto me. To his left, Mother's Milk emerged, his massive frame tense, his eyes scanning the perimeter for ambushes. From the sliding side door, Frenchie stepped out, his hands hovering near his pockets. Finally, Huey Campbell slipped out, looking pale, terrified, and entirely out of his depth. They walked toward the porch, stopping at the base of the rotting wooden steps. I took another drag of the cigar, letting the silence stretch, forcing them to feel the weight of the moment. Well, 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 Butcher said, his voice a mocking purr that echoed in the quiet night. If it isn't the ghost of America past. Have to say, you look bloody fantastic for a bloke who's been pushing up daisies since Reagan was in office. I stared at him, the cigar clamped between my teeth. You're trespassing. We're paying a neighborly visit, Butcher corrected, taking a step closer, resting his boot on the bottom step. Heard you've been busy, doing the Lord's work. I don't do the Lord's work, I said, my voice adopting the gravelly timbre of the legendary hero. I do my work. And right now, you're interrupting my smoke. Fair enough, Butcher smirked, pulling his hands out of his pockets and holding them up in a gesture of mock surrender. Straight to business, then. Vought sold you out. They let you rot in a Russian freezer while they built a shiny new toy to take your place. I let a puff of smoke escape my lips. I know who took my place. Then you know he's a right proper C***T, Butcher said, his eyes gleaming with a manic intensity. And he's untouchable. To us, anyway, but you're the original recipe. You've got the muscle. We've got the intel. We know where they hide their dirty secrets. We can help you tear Vought down to the bloody bedrock. Mother's Milk shifted his weight uneasily. We can get you access to the tower. We have blueprints, security rotations. I looked at them. A grieving husband, a paranoid medic, a manic chemist, and a traumatized retail worker. I don't need a boy band, I said, my tone dismissive. Butcher's smirk vanished. The charismatic facade cracked, revealing the raging core beneath. Don't be a stupid old man, Butcher snapped, taking another step up the stairs. You think you can just waltz into Vought Tower and start punching? They'll swamp you. You need us. I don't need anyone, I said. I pulled the cigar from my mouth and flicked it into the dry grass. You're making a mistake, Butcher growled, reaching into his coat. Huey grabbed Butcher's arm, his voice a frantic whisper. Butcher. Shut it, Huey, Butcher snarled, shaking him off. He looked back at me, his eyes wild. You listen to me, you arrogant prick. Homelander took my wife. I am going to see him dead, and if you aren't going to help me, you can get out of my bloody way. I stood up from the railing. The wood creaked under the immense weight of the Tier 1 muscle density. I'm not in your way, I said, looking down at them. You're in mine. I focused on the core of energy resting dormant in my sternum. Radiation blast Tier 1. The reaction was instantaneous. A deep thrumming sound began to vibrate from my chest, like a nuclear reactor spinning up to critical mass. A brilliant green light began to shine through the fabric of my tactical vest, casting a glowing shadow over the faces of the 4 men below. What is that? Frenchie whispered, taking a step back, his hands trembling. Huey stared at the glowing light, pure horror paralyzing his limbs. Butcher stood his ground, his face bathed in the radioactive glow. Bollocks, Butcher whispered. I released the lock on the energy. The blast was an eruption of localized nuclear devastation. The beam of radioactive plasma tore from my chest in a blindingly expanding cone of absolute destruction. It hit Billy Butcher first. The sheer thermal kinetic force of the Tier 1 blast evaporated the moisture in his body in a microsecond. His trench coat, his flesh, his bones, they flashed into white-hot ash and scattered atoms before his brain could even register the sensation of pain. The beam swallowed Mother's Milk, Frenchie, and Huey an instant later. The blast wave erased them from the physical plane. The beam continued, striking the heavy metal frame of the transit van. The engine block melted into slag, the tires vaporized, and the chassis disintegrated into a cloud of molten shrapnel. The shockwave tore through the earth, ripping the grass from the soil and shattering the foundation of the farmhouse behind me. I cut the beam off. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the crackle of localized fires burning in the superheated dirt. A glowing cloud of radioactive dust drifted slowly in the night breeze. Where the 4 men and their van had stood, there was nothing but a scorched trench carved into the earth, 50 yards long and 10 yards wide. I picked up my shield, turning my back on the crater. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. 73, Chapter 73, Victoria Neuman bonus chapter. Red unit perspective. The spatial coordinates are locked. Pop, 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 pop. The 5 members of the Red Unit materialized simultaneously in a pitch-black utility corridor. The matte black mark IV tactical armor absorbed the faint ambient light. On their chest plates, the crimson word red caught the reflection of a distant emergency exit sign. They moved forward as a silent armored phalanx. They reached the end of the corridor. A massive vault-style steel door blocked their path. The biometric scanner glowed red. Red 4 projected his mind through the 10 inches of solid steel, brushing against the consciousness of the 2 armed security guards stationed on the other side. "Open the door," Red 4 whispered, sending the psychic command directly into their motor cortexes. On the other side of the steel, the sounds of movement echoed. A keypad beeped. A heavy locking mechanism thudded and the massive vault door hissed, sliding slowly on its hydraulic tracks. The door opened to reveal a state-of-the-art biological laboratory. Glass containment units, centrifuges, and stainless steel workstations gleamed under the harsh white lights. The 2 guards stood rigidly by the control panel, their eyes blank, their weapons holstered. Red 1 walked past them, stepping into the lab. He didn't even look at them. "Sleep," Red 4 commanded as he passed. The 2 guards collapsed to the floor simultaneously, their brains instructed to shut down autonomic breathing functions. They asphyxiated silently in their sleep. At the far end of the lab, behind a secondary wall of reinforced glass, stood Victoria Neuman and Dr. Samir Shah. They were bent over a microscope, examining a glowing vial of reddish liquid. At the sound of the heavy boots on the pristine floor, they looked up. Samir's eyes went wide with terror. He dropped a clipboard, the plastic shattering on the floor. Victoria Neuman's reaction was entirely different. Her face hardened into a mask of lethal intent. "Samir, get down," Victoria shouted. She turned her gaze directly onto Red 1, who was leading the formation. Her eyes clouded over, turning an opaque white. "Hemakinesis." She locked onto the blood flowing through Red 1's brain. She reached out with her telekinetic grip, intending to force the blood pressure to spike exponentially, to burst the skull from the inside out in a geyser of bone and gore. Inside his helmet, Red 1 felt a dull pressure building behind his eyes. It felt like a mild sinus headache. Victoria gritted her teeth, holding her hands up, trembling with the sheer effort of the exertion. Veins bulged on her forehead. A thin trickle of blood began to leak from her left nostril. She was pushing her power to its absolute maximum limit. But Red 1's biology was fortified by Tier 1 super defense. His veins, his arteries, the capillaries in his brain, they were functionally indestructible. Her telekinetic grip was trying to crush titanium pipes with a pair of plastic tweezers. "Impossible," Victoria gasped, wiping the blood from her nose, her eyes wide with shock as the armored figure continued to walk calmly toward the glass wall. Red 3 raised his right hand, pointing it through the reinforced glass at the cowering Dr. Samir Shah. "Cryokinesis Tier 1. The temperature inside the glass containment room dropped instantly. Samir didn't have time to scream. The absolute zero energy washed over him, flash freezing the water in his cells. He turned stark white, a statuesque sculpture of a terrified man. Victoria screamed, breaking her futile hold on Red 1's blood. She turned her clouded eyes on Red 3, desperate to pop his head before he could freeze her too. Red 5 vanished from the formation. Size alteration Tier 3. He shrank to a centimeter in height, his mass condensing. He sprinted across the floor, faster than the eye could track, diving through a microscopic gap in the rubber seal of the glass door. Victoria was clutching her head, the feedback from trying to crush indestructible blood vessels causing her immense pain. Red 5 launched himself from the floor, soaring through the air like a bullet. He aimed for the back of Victoria's knee joint. In midair, a millimeter before impact, he released his power, growing back to his full 6-foot height, clad in 600 pounds of Mark IV armor. The sudden displacement of mass, and the immense kinetic force of the materializing armor, slammed directly into Victoria's leg. Cracked. Her knee shattered, bending completely backward with a sickening crunch. Victoria shrieked in agony, collapsing to the floor, her hemakinesis completely disrupted by the sudden physical trauma. Red 5 stood over her, his armored boot resting on her chest, pinning her to the ground. Red 1 gripped the reinforced glass wall separating them. He dug his armored fingers into the glass, the Tier 1 strength easily finding purchase, and simply tore the wall down, tossing the shattered sheets of safety glass aside. He walked over and stood beside Red 5, looking down at the blood manipulator. Who are you?" Victoria gasped, coughing up blood, her eyes darting between the towering armored figures. "Edgar? Did Edgar send you?" Red 2 moved through the lab. He approached the cold storage units holding the experimental soup virus. He placed his hand on the heavy steel refrigerators. Pop! The entire refrigerator vanished, transferred into the dimensional inventory space. Pop, pop, pop. Centrifuges, electron microscopes, filing cabinets filled with physical research notes. They all vanished in rapid succession. Red 4 stepped up to Samir's main terminal. He pulled a compact data spike from his tactical belt and connected it directly to the hard drive's interface. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his hacking mastery guiding him as he navigated through layers of heavy encryption. He typed in a string of complex decryption keywords, bypassing the firewalls until the directory tree finally spilled open on the monitor. With the connection secured, he initiated the transfer, watching the progress bar as every piece of research, every experimental log, and every hidden file was copied onto his drive. Red 1 looked back down at Victoria. She was clutching her ruined leg, her eyes filled with fear. "Please," she whispered. Red 1 lifted his armored boot and brought it down precisely on her skull. The heavy ceramic plating, driven by Tier 1 super strength, crushed her head against the concrete floor like a ripe melon. Red 1 retrieved a Spencer Industries thermite canister from the inventory space. He activated the dial, setting the timer for exactly 60 seconds, and dropped it into the center of the stripped lab. "Link up," Red 2 ordered. The 5 armored clones joined hands. Pop! The lab was empty. 50 seconds later, the thermite ignited, burning at 4,000 degrees, melting the frozen remains of Samir Shah, the crushed body of Victoria Neuman, and every microscopic trace of DNA left behind. Goal: 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library: add to your library for updates. 74, Chapter 74, The Woods bonus chapter. Red unit perspective. 30 minutes later. A subterranean bunker hidden beneath a decommissioned poultry farm in rural Maryland. The plaque above the heavy steel door read, Avian and Mammalian Research Division, Vought Agriculture. Pop! The red unit materialized in the center of the main holding pen. The room was a cacophony of bizarre noises. Rows upon rows of reinforced steel cages lined the walls. Red 4 reached out with his mind into the control room. Through the viewing window, Red 1 watched the 8 scientists in white coats suddenly stop moving. They stood up from their desks in unison. One of the scientists walked calmly to the emergency glass break station, pulled out a heavy fire axe, and systematically, without a shred of emotion, buried the axe into the skulls of his 7 colleagues. When the last one fell, the scientist turned the axe around, placed the handle on the floor, and drove his own eye socket onto the blade. They fanned out. The animals were a testament to Edgar's desperation to test Compound V without the legal hurdles of human trials. Red 3 walked past a cage holding a golden retriever. The dog snarled, its jaw unhinging to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. It barked, and a volley of bone spikes shot from its mouth. Red 3 raised a hand. The air in front of him froze into a solid shield of ice, the bone spikes shattering harmlessly against it. He dropped the temperature inside the cage to absolute 0. The dog froze mid-snarl. Red 2 stood in front of a large aviary. Inside, a flock of ordinary-looking sheep were floating in the air, bleating in confusion, bouncing off the ceiling. Red 2 touched the steel mesh of the cage. He teleported the flock of sheep 10 feet straight down. The sheep materialized directly inside the solid concrete floor of the bunker, fusing instantly with the stone. Red 1 approached a reinforced plexiglass tank. Inside was a massive guinea pig, the size of a bulldog, its muscles bulging grotesquely under its fur. It threw itself against the glass, spider webbing the reinforced polymer with a single headbutt. Red 1 punched the glass, shattering it entirely. The super-powered guinea pig lunged, its jaws snapping shut on Red 1's armored forearm. The animal's teeth shattered against the carbon nanotube plating. Red 1 grabbed the rodent by the scruff of its neck, squeezed his fist, and crushed its spine. He tossed the limp body into the corner. Was that a flying pig? Red 2 asked over the comms, watching a winged piglet crash into a wall. Negative, Red 1 replied. Target was a heavily mutated rodent. Red 5 shrank down, leaping through the bars of a terrarium to engage a swarm of telekinetic spiders, his tiny armored fists smashing them into paste against the glass. In 5 minutes, the menagerie of horrors was silenced. Red 2 and Red 4 went to work, teleporting the data servers and the specialized veterinary medical equipment into the dimensional inventory, leaving nothing but blood-stained cages. Red 1 dropped the thermite canister. Timer set, jump. Pop. The animal testing facility burned. Red Unit perspective. Deep beneath the manicured campus of Godolkin University lay a facility known only as the Woods. It was a prison, a laboratory, and a slaughterhouse. Pop. The Red Unit appeared inside the main security hub, bypassing the heavy blast doors and the biometric scanners above ground. The dozen heavily armed VOT security contractors sitting at the monitors didn't even have time to shout. Red 4's psychic wave hit them like a physical blow. Their eyes glazed over. Lock the blast doors, disable the alarms, then draw your sidearms, Red 4 commanded. The guards moved in synchronized obedience. They locked down the facility, sealing themselves inside. They drew their pistols, placing the barrels beneath their own chins. Fire! A dozen gunshots rang out in unison, the sound muffled by the thick concrete walls. Blood sprayed across the glowing monitors. Red 5 shrank to the size of a bullet. He sprinted out of the hub and down the corridor, disappearing under the door of the central laboratory. Inside the lab, 5 scientists were desperately trying to figure out why the security feeds had just gone dead. Red 5 launched himself from the floor, aiming for the ear canal of the lead researcher. He flew inside the man's head and expanded to the size of a golf ball, instantly rupturing the brain case and blowing the top of the man's skull off. He shrank back down, dropping to the floor, and repeated the process. Pop. Crunch. Pop. Crunch. In 30 seconds, the lab was painted red. Red 5 resized, standing amidst the carnage. Red 1, 2, 3, and 4 walked into the main cell block. It was a sterile corridor, lined with heavy steel doors with small viewing windows. This was where Vought kept the young sups they deemed too dangerous, too uncontrollable, or simply too useful for experimentation to let them live in the light. They separated, moving down the cell block like the 4 horsemen. Red 1 stopped at the first door. The placard read, Aquila Prens. He grabbed the handle and tore the heavy steel door from the wall, tossing it into the corridor. Inside, a terrified young woman backed into the corner. Red 1 stepped in, placed a hand on her chest, and crushed her heart with a single pulse of strength. Red 3 opened the next door. Am I Perrin? He simply exhaled into the room, a breath of absolute zero that flash froze the boy as he slept. They moved down the line, a mechanical rhythm of death. Andy, crushed by Red 1. Betsy, teleported into the ceiling by Red 2. Cam Christie, brain deactivated by Red 4. Red 3 stepped in front of a cell labeled glowing eyes soup. The boy inside tried to fire a beam of concentrated light from his eyes. Red 3 froze the moisture in the boy's corneas, shattering his eyes before freezing his brain. Bald soup, dead. Bleeding ear soup, dead. Electric soup, dead. Red 1 tore open a door labeled Greg Gilmore. The boy inside tried to turn his skin to steel. Red 1 punched him, his Tier 1 strength shattering the steel skin and the fragile bones beneath it. Ingrid Kim, dead. Carrie Wiley, dead. Lauren Curry, dead. They continued the march. Maria Lepun, dead. Monique Arsenault, dead. Rich, dead. Susan Jones, dead. Red 1 crushed the shredded shirt soup. Red 3 froze the sweaty soup. Thandu, dead. Tony Wang, dead. The cell block was silent. 22 lives, 22 tragedies of Vought's ambition, snuffed out in less than 10 minutes. They reconvened in the central lab. Red 2 and Red 4 went to work. The virus research, the genetic sequencing data, the behavioral conditioning tools, the culmination of Brink's and Cardosa's life's work, all vanished into the dimensional inventory. Red 4 linked with the central mainframe, pulling the data directly into his drive and wiping the servers clean, overwriting decades of research with corrupted code. Red 1 dropped the final thermite canister. 60 seconds. They linked hands. Pop. The red unit vanished from the woods. Behind them, beneath the pristine lawns of Godolkin University, the fire began to burn. Goal, 100 power stones equals 1 bonus chapter. Library, add to your library for updates. All right, legends, that's it for today. If you're ready for the next chapter, smash that like button and flood the comments right now. Remember, we've got 3 days to prove this story needs to continue. Subscribe so you don't miss the drop, and I'll meet you in the next audiobook.